Hey, what's up guys? I'm Tim Cant. This is a beginner's guide to jungle breakbeats where we're going to look at some context and history as well as some actual getting your hands dirty chopping some beats. I'm going to be using Ableton Live, but this isn't really designed to be specific to one DAW. You can, it's a broader guide so that you can use the tricks in your software of choice. There are chapter markers if you want to go straight for the chopping. That's chapter 5, and the exciting, juicy breakbeat tricks and tips are at chapter 8. So let's get cracking. Breakbeats, or breaks, are drum solos. These are most commonly found in R&B and funk music from the late 1960s and 70s. You've probably already heard famous breaks such as the Winstons' Amen Brother. Bobby Bird, Hot Pants bonus beats. I'm coming, help me. And Lynn Collins' Think, a track which includes several well-sampled solos. Now, here's how they sound sped up to jungle tempo. These jungle classics are all taken from funk and R&B tracks, but you can find breakbeats in all kinds of music. Led Zeppelin's When the Levee Breaks is a classic rock breakbeat. Tommy Roe's Sweet Pea is a 60s sunshine pop track that happens to have a really rugged breakbeat at the start. In the 1970s, DJs began using two turntables to elongate these drum solo sections by swapping between two copies of the same record, effectively allowing them to create a drum solo that continues indefinitely. This was the birth of hip-hop music, and in the 1980s, the idea of using small parts of records to create an elongated, beat-based piece of music was taken to the next level with the introduction of affordable digital samplers. Machines like the Akai MPC-60 and the EMU SP1200 allowed hip-hop producers to record these breakbeats and sequence them into something new. From a jungle perspective, Mantronic's King of the Beats from 1988 is particularly relevant because all the elements of a jungle track, aside from a big sub-bass line, are here, including a chopped-up Amen break, though it's at a much slower tempo than jungle, a relatively down-tempo 105 BPM or so. Up to this point, breakbeat sampling was predominantly an American art form, but in the late 80s, UK hip-hop acts such as MC Duke, Hijack, Hard Noise, and Silver Bullet began using these techniques too. So did an act called Shut Up and Dance. Shut Up and Dance made straight-up hip-hop jams like This Town Needs a Sheriff, but their music was also influenced by the acid house scene that kicked off in Britain in the late 80s, and their music began getting faster and incorporating more electronic elements. They were at the forefront of house and techno artists using breakbeats in dance music, and as early as 1990 and 1991, records that can be identified as jungle began to appear. Tracks like The Scientist, Exorcist, Shut Up and Dance, Derek Went Mad, Low Noise Block, Rave in the Bedroom, and of course Lenny D-Ice, We Are IE. By late 1991, the UK dance music scene was a melting pot of different styles, including these early jungle sounds, plus techno and house, which created a seminal moment in dance music history: hardcore rave. The hardcore act that crossed over the most into the mainstream was The Prodigy, and in their 1991 track Charlie, you can hear breakbeats, heavy reggae-influenced bass lines, and resampled Roland Alpha Juno Hoover sounds. These kinds of sounds are still very much the foundation of what we hear in drum and bass today. Charlie's beat demonstrates an interesting facet of jungle music production. It samples the beat from Meat Beat Manifesto's Radio Babylon, which itself samples Bobby Bird Hot Pants, which we heard earlier. So, rather than being static, breakbeats developed, and the hardware and techniques used to create each generation affected their sound. Another track that sampled Hot Pants is the Stone Roses' Fool's Gold, and this second generation break would get sampled a ton in hardcore tracks such as Awesome 3's Don't Go, and Rat Pack's Searchin' for My Rizzler. Another Hot Pants based second generation break is Big Daddy Kane's Raw, which is sampled in DJ Redlert and Mike Slammer's In Effect and Q Project's Champion Sound Alliance remix. So, from one source you can have many disparate variations. Many early jungle producers were sampling from sample CDs rather than first generation records, and these would often feature second or third generation samples themselves. Back in the day, sample CDs were the most practical way for producers to get their hands on sounds to be used in sample-based music, and often contained tons of copyright infringing material. Being based around sample breakbeats, copyright infringement is very much a part of jungle's DNA. I personally have never heard of a producer getting hit with legal action due to sampling a breakbeat. But, on the other hand, if you're making money with your music and blatantly sampling, then things can get tricky. For example, the case of Shut Up and Dance's Raving I'm Raving, which featured an unlicensed interpolation of the music and lyrics from Mark Cohen's Walking in Memphis. After charting in the UK top 10, it was hit with a legal injunction and subsequently deleted. Because so many of the early sample CDs contained infringing material, they're no longer in production and can be difficult to get hold of. More of that later in Chapter 4. By 1993, the jungle elements of hardcore started to become crystallised in tracks such as DJ Crystal's Meditation, Deep Blue's The Helicopter Tune, LTJ Bookham's Music, and Omni Trio's Renegade Snares. These tracks brought the sample breaks to the fore sonically. They weren't such a chaotic collision of styles as hardcore rave, had a more streamlined, mature sound, and the genre distinction drum and bass became prevalent. This style gave the breaks more room in the mix to sound louder and allowed their rhythmic complexity to shine through, giving the genre a clear distinction from hardcore. By this point, the hardcore rave scene was already splitting into distinct genres, jungle/DnB being one, happy hardcore and hardcore techno being the others. At first, happy hardcore featured a lot of breakbeat action like jungle, though often with 4/4 techno style beats over the top. The increased sonic focus on breakbeats in DnB gave producers more room for breakbeat acrobatics, and the edits and processing tricks that became more prominent in 1993 really came to the forefront. The breakbeats started to become the hooks of tracks such as Engineers Without Fear's Rhythm, Omni Trio Renegade Snares Foul Play VIP, and DJ Chrome and Mr. Time The License. In 1995, a couple of very special records were released by the figure I consider to be the most important in the development of jungle into straight-up drum and bass. Reese. Reese developed a signature sound that was more focused on punchy one-shots than original breakbeat edits, and two of his tracks, a remix of Model 500's The Flow and his original track Pulp Fiction, ushered in a new era of drum and bass, two-step. The beat from The Flow was sampled on dozens of DnB tracks, including seminal works like Nasty Habits' Shadowboxing, DJ Trace's Mutant Revisited, and Codename John The Warning, as the tech step era of DnB arrived. Tech step tended to be steppier, less rolling beats compared to jungle, and these less busy beats gave producers more room for more involved mid-range filling bass sounds in their mixes. These noises became the focus of the music itself, and it's easy to draw a line between late 90s tech step and the neurofunk sound that evolved in the 21st century. You can hear the influence of tracks like Shadowboxing in the work of Bad Company, Pendulum, Noisier and so on. By the arrival of two-step, one can argue that jungle's evolution into drum and bass was complete, and I don't think it's too controversial to say that by 1996, broadly speaking, this type of music wasn't referred to as jungle anymore, but rather drum and bass. Of course, jungle breakbeats were still used in drum and bass, they just weren't its focus basically 100% of the time as they were in jungle. Breakbeats sound cool, but why? Well, they're chock full of musical goodness. First up, breaks can be highly rhythmic. Let's take a look at this Simon Harris Amen. We can see from its deviation from the grid that it's got a bit of swing to it. Swing is when beats are intentionally played off-grid, which when used judiciously can give rhythms a funky feel. Also, we've got these ghost snares, which gives this part of the break a shuffly feel. Again, funky. Here I've got two versions of this Amen at 165 BPM, pitched up 4 semitones. The first has all the swung hats and ghost snares replaced with hats. The second is the unedited break. The edited break has a more rigid, dare I say it, drum and bass feel compared to the merely sped up version. I'd say it sounds more like mid-90s jump up DnB, whereas the less processed version sounds more like jungle. I certainly wouldn't say that the difference between jungle and DnB is an absence of swing, but I would venture that less edited breaks tend to sound more jungleistic. This is one of the reasons I tend to prefer sourcing breaks from places other than dedicated DnB sample libraries, as having a less processed version gives me more flexibility to sculpt it the way I want. Secondly, although they're primarily percussive, breaks can have quite a bit going on pitch-wise. Kicks and snares are tunable drums, of course. We can make a break's pitched information more obvious by pitch shifting it up a couple of octaves. For this I'm going to use Akai-izer, which is a standalone application designed to emulate the time-stretching capabilities of Akai hardware samplers. If you're a fan of older jungle and hardcore tracks, you'll likely recognise the metallic sound it creates that really emphasises the pitched information in the sample. This pitching up really emphasises the musicality of these beats, and even if you're not pitching these beats up, their musicality can be quite evident. For example, if you're just starting out on a tune with a break and a sine bass sub, you might feel the sub is more at home on one note than another, and that's to do with the musical information you hear in the break. Thirdly, breaks have their own timbre, and one break can feel very different in terms of texture from another. I'll demonstrate this using the Boomerang break. Much like Alex Reese's The Flow break, Boomerang's Soul Beat Runner is a DnB break that's been sampled a lot. There's no way you could confuse this with an Amen, right? Well, according to YouTube commenter Clonhead, he spoke to Graham Sutton, aka Boomerang, online about this break, and from what I can tell, this account of its creation seems pretty legit. Apparently Boomerang painstakingly created it, using one-shots playing the same rhythm as the original Amen. Let's play the Amen and Boomerang break at the same tempo. So clearly these breaks are very similar in the rhythm of the drums, but the beefy Boomerang break feels very different from this particular, quite thin sounding Amen. This is because different drum sounds are used, and it gives a different textural character as a result. So as I see it, breaks have 3 qualities that make up their overall character: rhythm, pitch, and timbre. These elements can work with the rest of your project, or against it. If your break isn't working rhythmically with the rest of your elements, or has weird tuning, or has a timbre that's incongruous with the other elements, it may sound bad. Or you might like how it sounds. Whatever, it doesn't matter. The important thing to know is that breaks are a rich concoction of musical elements, and as such, are a double-edged sword. They can make a track sound cool with relatively little effort, but used poorly, they can make things sound really messy. There are many ways to get jungle breaks. If you're a purist, you can get some classic breakbeat tracks on vinyl, get a record player such as a Technics SL1200, run it through a DJ mixer, and record the output from that into your audio interface. Of course, the quality of the results will depend on the condition of the record you're sampling, the state of your turntable and cartridge, and the audio interface you're using. Sampling from audio CD is an option too, and even though you can simply drag the audio files off these onto a computer, the quality of the results may vary depending on the mastering of the track in question. I sample a little from vinyl and CD, but my main source of breaks is OG sample CDs, because you can get some really great quality breaks from them. Sadly, the OG sample CD greats have been discontinued, so it's not possible to pick them up directly from online retailers. However, if you do some Googling, you can find big collections of classic 90s sample CD libraries, and I'll leave that up to you. Sample CDs I'd recommend checking out for breakbeats include the Zero G Data Files series, volumes 1 to 3, Norman Cook's Skip to My Loops, Megabass Volume 1, DJ Ron and DJ Dextrous's Breakpoint, Simon Harris Broken, Beaten, Scratched, and most importantly, Jungle Frenzy Volume 1. I use the hot pants and think breaks on here regularly, and it also includes some other classics, including a big chunky Amen. Highly recommended. I personally find it superior to Jungle Warfare, which seems a bit more well known. What I don't recommend is ripping breaks from YouTube or other sources with lossy compression, such as MP3 or M4A files. Breaks can have a lot of transients and information in the highs, and I feel like sampling from lossy sources isn't ideal for this kind of material. That's not to say people don't do it though. In 2018, I interviewed Mark from Solado for Computer Music's Producer Masterclass feature, and he talks about using a hot pants break, which he says he remembers taking from an MP3. I've put a link to that moment in the description. I guess using a break in the context of a house track is a little different, as you're perhaps not relying on the transients and body of the break so much, as the kick drum is doing the real heavy lifting, as it were. Nonetheless, I like to try and get my hands on different versions of the same break, because I like to have the flexibility to experiment. For example, here are a bunch of amens that all have different feels. So in summary, there are breaks all over the place, and it's worth trying to source a few different versions of your favourites just to make sure you've got some options to experiment with. Back in the day, one would record a breakbeat into a hardware sampler, or something less expensive like an Amiga, then pitch it up to fit their new track's tempo. So let's say it's 1994 and we're making a track at 160 BPM. I'm not going to use a hardware sampler because it's long-winded and I sold mine in 2002. Instead, I'm going to grab this 1-bar Amen and I'm going to load it into a drum rack in Ableton Live, which we can use in pretty much the same way as any old school hardware sampler. At its default pitch, the break is much too slow for the project tempo, and we can hear that it's out of time with Live's metronome. So let's speed it up. At plus 6 semitones, plus 47 cents, it's sounding like it's in time with the metronome. We don't just want to loop the same bar over and over, so it's time for some choppage. Currently the sample pad is set to trigger mode, which means the sample always plays all the way through. However, in this case, I want the sample to stop when the MIDI note finishes playing, so I set it to gate mode. I'm going to duplicate out the pad and move the sample start mark onto the first snare. I want to make sure it's nice and tight because if there's a gap between the start marker and the actual snare, it'll play late and sound loose. I'm going to label the first pad kick and the second pad snare. I sequence the snare to play between the third and fourth beat. Now we can make a much more involved pattern that sounds more like jungle than a repeating loop. We could stop there, but let's have another pad for the break shuffle section as well. Now we can create, say, a really long shuffle section. So I'm shortening the kick, put a snare on the second beat, then just have a load of shuffles, I guess, until we have another snare on the final eighth note. Once you've got your kick, snare and shuffle slices, the possibilities really start to open up. You can make all kinds of breakbeat patterns like these. You can add more slices and have, say, each snare on its own pad, and this is very much a matter of personal preference. Of course, cutting all those slices manually can be time consuming, which is why these days software can do it for you automatically. So, in the early 90s, everybody was kung fu slicing, but it was all by hand and took quite a while. However, in 1994, Propellerhead Software, now known as Reason Studios, released a piece of software called Recycle. At the time, it was a pretty high-end bit of kit, as it required a Mac or Windows machine when most jungle producers were still using the relatively affordable Atari ST or Amiga. For the junglist of means though, Recycle could detect transients and would split a drum loop into individual slices, then create a MIDI sequence with the correct timing to play them back. This software took the effort out of beat slicing, and thanks to its ability to spit out MIDI with the correct timing, it made it easy for producers to change the tempo of loops simply by playing the MIDI sequence back at a different tempo. This avoided the need for time stretching, which can have a smearing effect on a break's transients. This kind of technology is now available in most DAWs as standard, and offers a taste of old-school choppage with less effort. How it works depends on your DAW. In Live, you warp a loop to fit the project tempo, then right-click the clip and select Slice to New MIDI Track. Live offers the user a variety of slicing presets that set up controls for affecting the slice sample's parameters. I created my own slice preset called Breakbeat, which has macros for pitch and amplitude envelope parameters. Each individual hit of the beat has its own slice, and as such I can change the tempo and pitch of the beat independently of each other. My Breakbeat slicing preset has individual controls for semitone and scent tuning. This is useful if you want to transpose the break to fit a different key. The clicks at the end of each sample can be remedied by going through and adjusting the sample endpoints. I can even put real-time pitch bend on the beat and it'll change pitch, yet stay in time. Having all the slices individually chopped gives you a greater degree of control over the positioning of each sound, though of course, if you want to retain the feel of the original break, you'll have to retain their timing to get the same groove. My Breakbeat slicing preset also has ADSR controls, so you can tighten the beat up and make it more steppy. These days, I tend to work with breaks on audio tracks, which is useful because it gives you more visual feedback and different editing options to working with MIDI. You can process breaks in a DAW without using any warping by turning up the playback speed so that it's broadly in time with a metronome. Then, if any beats aren't tight enough for your liking, you can slice the point where they should start, then reposition the start point of the new clip. You might find there's some unwanted audio before the slice. You can roll back the clip you just made to cover this, or simply truncate the previous clip, which will give you a gap in the audio that may or may not be desirable. Here's how the break sounds once I've gone through and made sure all the hits are positioned to my liking. The disadvantage of this method is that, unless you're going to cut out each slice, you're not going to be able to change the pitch of the break without causing timing issues, which is why these days I tend to use Ableton Live's warping capabilities. Most DAWs have similar capabilities. It's worth learning about these and checking out the various warping modes to hear how they affect your material. A warping algorithm that might work well on a vocal might not be optimal for a break, so it's good to know what's what. In Live, I activate Warp, and Live will analyse the break and give us a pretty accurate set of transient markers that tell the software where each hit occurs. I make sure the first beat is on the downbeat of the break, which will almost certainly be a kick drum. I then locate the start of the second bar and drag it into position. I then activate loop mode and set the loop start and end points to the beginning and end of the bar. We can now change the pitch and tempo of the beat at will. If you slow the beat down, you'll notice that we don't get any gaps in the playback. We're using Live's beat warp mode, which is great because it doesn't apply any granular processing and therefore doesn't smear the sound of the break's transients. So how does it avoid having gaps in a slowed down break? Beat's default transient loop mode is set to loops back and forth, so Live is looping each slice so that there are no gaps. Now, that's fine, and you may find you prefer this mode. However, I like the cleaner sound of the offsetting, where there's no looping and each slice simply plays until the end and then stops. This can give us big gaps depending on what you're doing with the break, but as you're almost certainly going to be speeding these breaks up, that's not really a concern. The choice you make on this mode will likely depend on the context, but I almost always go for off. It's also worth noting that in off mode, the transient envelope can be used to tighten up the break. I don't tend to use this method too much, and I usually use a transient shaper, which I'll show you in the next chapter. Using warp mode, we can quickly move hits into a quantized position. If we're layering multiple breaks, we can adjust their timing so that they sit together more satisfyingly. We can also easily tune breaks to fit more musically with the other elements of a track. For example, you can transpose one break to fit more musically with another. A couple of little tips for picking which breaks to use. I tend to find that layering multiple breaks with ride cymbals tends to sound messy, so if I'm using something ride heavy like Amen or Do the Do, I'll tend to pair it with something more tambourine like Think or Hot Pants. Also, not all breaks sound great at a DnB tempo of 170 BPM plus, and this is usually down to them being too busy, not sounding great when pitched up, or something like that. So, you might find it tougher to find breaks that sound good at DnB tempo relative to a jungle tempo of, say, 155 BPM. This is normal, and a big reason why Amen, Versatile Extension, and Think are so ubiquitous in DnB. Now we've seen a few break chopping methods, let's look at 25 tips that we can use to make some effects and edits and help with mixing. Having little gaps in breaks can sound cool and funky. Also, fast chops can give you an exciting, gating style stutter effect. By repeating a note and increasing or decreasing the velocity, you can make this jungleistic roll effect. Closing a low-pass filter over a beat gives you this metalhead style effect. For an atmospheric DnB type effect, you can sweep a high-pass filter up and down at the end of a section. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but if you turn down the sustain and decay on your slice breaks amplitude envelope, you can make a tighter, steppier break. You can also try turning up the attack if you've got too many transients going on in your track or something. As we saw with Akai earlier, you can get cool old school metallic sounds by pitching your breaks up. You can create melodic effects by pitching them to different notes. You can pitch them down for this origin unknown style effect. You'll get a different character if you adjust the cycle length, or switch between the classic and revised algorithms. Sadly, Akai's development has been discontinued, though at the time of recording, you can still use it on Windows and older versions of macOS that allow 32-bit applications to be used. You can find the download page in the description. You can use your DAW's pitch shifting capabilities to get a similar but not identical effect. As we saw before, if you're using individual slices, you can use pitch bend in real time. If you're using warp breaks, you can do the same thing, and you'll get a different quality of results depending on the algorithm you use. For a roughage crew style effect, try the Eventide H3000 factory plugin. If you're after a rough and rugged DnB style beat, try pitching your break down. Assigning the velocity to a filter can give you a cool moving shadow-esque effect. Playing breaks an octave down or up will give you that mashed up jungle sound. If you set up a snare slice that you can play up and down the keyboard, you can get these crazy chrome and time style effects. Stretching a snare out to a few times its length gives you this rather rude effect. You can create comb filters by layering up a break or two on channels and delaying one of them slightly. The timing difference affects the frequency of the comb filtering effect. Simply running breaks through phasers or flanges will give you a satisfying old school style effect. Having a high feedback value will give you a suburban bass style sound. Adding feedback delay can give you a rushy breakbeat effect reminiscent of DeCruz's Watch Out. Making edits with reverse breaks is fun. I suggest moving the start point of the reverse break so that the transients are more in time with the metronome to make the effect sound tight. Having a section where the Amen starts on the snare is great for 93-94 style vibes. Some breaks will be stereo. You might find you prefer monoing the signal or using just the left or right channel. Depending on the break, these can give you a significantly different sound. If you'd like to control the balance of the summed left and right signal in your mono break, add a monoizing plugin and another before that controls the pan. This way you can adjust the amount of left and right channel signal in the resulting mono output. If your breaks are sounding harsh in the highs, I really recommend the excellent Soothe 2 plugin. This can take out harsh frequencies in a way that I find impossible to achieve with regular EQs, and I'll often use Soothe 2 in conjunction with FabFilter Pro Q3. If you're after an authentic 90s style sound, then Infonic RX950 is worth checking out. It emulates the AD and DA converters in the Akai S950, so you can grit up your beats by whacking some gain on them in here. The audio bandwidth control is worth experimenting with, as this has a big effect on the character of your break's top end. It can be easy to make stuff over bright and harsh with this control, so take care. Another way to get an old school sound is to try reducing the sample rate and or bit depth of your signal with a bit crusher plugin like Ableton Live's Redux. D16 Group Decimort 2 even has some presets based on classic samplers to check out. If you're after a rougher sound, Airwindow's excellent Mackie emulates a 90s Mackie desk, which again you can use to add grit to your beats. This works well with one-shot drums as well, for a later 90s DnB feel. Earlier we looked at Ableton Live's transient envelope and its ability to tighten up breaks. I like to use isotope neutron to reduce the sustain on just the mid-band. I find judicious usage of this helpful when working with roomier breaks in drum and bass. Here I've got a track with a reverb on it, and I can move a snare over to it to get a spot reverb effect, nice and easy. High-pass filters can take out unwanted low end in your breaks if they're conflicting with other elements of your mix. However, setting the cutoff frequency too high can take the weight out of the break too much, so take care. A convenient way to control the volume of breaks is to use Cable Guy's Shaperbox 2. You can tighten up your beats, turn down a break's kicks or snares, or dull transients if you're layering one-shots. Well, that was tons of breakbeat chopping fun. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Have fun chopping breakbeats. Jungle is wicked. I guess I'll see you later. Hey, what's up? Tim Cant here, and in this video we're going to be looking at making some jungle bass sounds. We're going to look at a bit of context and history, but mainly this time we're going to be looking at some synthesis using Serum, but it's pretty simple synthesis, so you should be able to recreate it in whatever synth you like. Links to the tracks mentioned and a whole load of other goodies are in the description, so let's get rolling. Jungle breaks and jungle bass both have a common ancestor in the American R&B music of the mid-20th century. Jungle breaks came largely from funk, which is a direct descendant of R&B, but jungle bass took a more circuitous route via Jamaica. R&B got big in Jamaica in the post-war period, and in the 50s the island evolved its own take on the sound, ska. In fact, the famous 60s ska hit My Boy Lollipop by Millie Small is the cover of the less well-known 50s R&B version by Barbie Gay. In the late 60s, an evolution of ska called reggae appeared. Reggae revolved around laid-back beats and big, smoothed-out electric bass. Jamaican sound systems had the power to blast out these big bass lines, and this is where bass music as we know it today is born. If you're a seasoned jungle enjoyer, you'll likely recognise these reggae bass lines that have been sampled in one or more jungle tunes. Links to the tracks in the video description. In the US in the late 80s, another descendant of R&B, hip-hop, spawned a subgenre called Miami bass. This is where US bass fetishization reached its zenith, and you can hear pre-jungle pitched 808s in tracks like Dynamics 2's Just Give the DJ a Break. Meanwhile in the UK, acid house music had its own bass-centric evolution in the form of bleep. This took techno beats and added weighty dub reggae-inspired bass lines that can be heard in tracks such as Ability 2's Pressure Dub, LFO's LFO, and Nightmare on Wax Aftermath. Bleep was a direct precursor to hardcore, and in hardcore bass lines you can hear influences from reggae, Miami bass, and bleep. Many early jungle producers had a limited amount of kit that was sample based, for example early Akai hardware samplers or Amiga's running tracker software. Enterprising producers used Akai sine test tones to create bass lines. These were ideal for making heavy hardcore bass because they had a high sustain level, and being a sine wave without any harmonics above the fundamental frequency, they left a lot of room in the mix for beefy breaks, heavy kicks, and full frequency stab sounds. You can hear sine subs in hardcore and jungle tunes such as Nuki's Give a Little Love and Origin Unknown's Valley of the Shadows. That said, the Akai test tone does have a subtle touch of harmonics at the very start, which we can hear and see with the help of Voxengo Span when I play back this sample of a sine test tone from an Akai 3000 XL. If you're looking for the utmost in authenticity, a sample of an Akai test tone is the way to go. There's a link to an S950 sample in the description, but we can get something pretty similar with Serum. I start with the default patch and set the first oscillator to the basic shapes wavetable. This gives us a sine by default, and if we look at Serum's wavetable editor, we can see that this features just the fundamental harmonic, very simple. Unlike a sampler, the phase of the waveform is randomized, which means that it starts from a different point each time. By turning the random phase knob down to 0, the oscillator will start from the same point in the waveform each time. We can now control the part of the waveform the patch starts from with the phase knob. At the origin we get a smooth sound, but if we move the start point to near the peak or the trough of the sine cycle, we get a little touch of attack, a bit like the Akai test tone. You can get the perfect balance of attack by selecting a specific point between the origin and the peak. Also, you'll want to activate mono voicing so that you can't play more than one note at once. A sine sub occupies just the lowest part of the mix. We can get a bigger feel by adding some harmonics. One way to do this is to activate Serum's filter and turn up the drive. I feel like this is a little too much with the phase attack, so I return the oscillator start point to the origin. Another way to introduce more harmonics is to use a waveform that already has them. Let's make a patch that uses a square wave oscillator. We can see from Serum's wavetable editor that this sound has a lot more harmonics, all the odd harmonics in fact, and they roll off gradually. This gives the square wave a very full sound. A bit too full for a bass sound, I'd argue, so let's activate the filter. With a low cutoff value, we get something similar to a sine sub, but with a bit more weight in the harmonics just above the fundamental. If we click the keyboard icon, the filter cutoff frequency will follow the note plate, giving us a more consistent sound. With a higher cutoff, we get something closer to a reggae synth bass, and this is something approaching the sort of bass lines you'd hear in tracks like Lenny the Ice We Are IE and SL2 Way in My Brain. Make it open further and add a flanger, you have something approaching Awesome 3 Headstrong. Here's a sub-bass patch that uses a triangle, which, as we can see from Serum's wavetable editor again, has odd harmonics, but these roll off more quickly than the square waveform. So, this is a quick way to add just a touch more energy above the fundamental without using a filter or drive. Often hardcore producers would use pitch bends to create swooping bass lines, and by setting Serum's pitch bend range to ±12 semitones, we can get this very effect. To give this a touch of Amiga style lo-fi, you can apply some bit depth and sample rate reduction. Here I've used Ableton Live's Redux effect with a bit depth of 8 and a sample rate of 6 kHz to add some noise and aliasing in the highs. This is reminiscent of tracks such as Urban Shakedown, Some Justice, and Foul Play, Finest Illusion. In 1993, as the nascent drum and bass style began to form, the use of sampled Roland TR-808 bass drums became increasingly popular. 808 bass drums have a heavy sub-component with a distinct pitch that lends them to being played chromatically, and you can hear these kind of bass sounds in tracks like LTJ Bookham's seminal Music, The Invisible Man, The Beginning, and DJ Mayhem Ines Ray Keith remix. Making an 808 bass line is as simple as finding a suitable 808 bass drum sample, loading it into your sampler, and tuning it. I generally use synthesized 808s exclusively these days, but back when I used to use 808 samples, I found Goldbaby's Tape 808 to be an excellent source of 808 bass tones. Samples from Mars also have a great collection of 808 sounds, and you can find links to both of these in the video description. Tuning 808s can be tricky as they drop in pitch, and this is what gives them their punchy, percussive feel. Personally, I like to tune 808s by ear, and to do this I pitch them up a few octaves and tune them with a reference instrument. If you take a listen to Ines Ray Keith remix, you'll notice that the 808 bass sounds are a touch distorted, likely as a result of being run a little hot through a desk. This adds harmonics and brings the sound into the mid-range. This is something that producers would lean into as the jump-up style of DnB emerged, and I believe you can hear this effect in tracks such as Shy FX's This Style and MA3 Those DJs. One can achieve an approximation of analog distortion using a plugin such as Soundtoy's Decapitator, and it's possible to create a wide variety of sounds using a single 808 sample and experimenting with the drive knob, style mode and punish toggle. For a more new school sound, you can try mixing some noise in with the 808, which will give you a crustier, dirtier result. As I mentioned earlier, I tend to use synthesized 808s for my own productions. This is because I want a long, loud sustain rather than the punchy, relatively staccato sound of a real 808. To achieve this in Serum, I set up a sine oscillator, turn the random phase down, then assign LFO1 to the coarse pitch of oscillator A. I changed this modulation to unipolar in the modulation matrix, so the patch doesn't go below the original frequency of the note. I set LFO's 1 mod to envelope, then create a fast drop down. I turn off LFO1's BPM sync so I can smoothly control the speed of the pitch drop. And I can control the amount of pitch modulation using the amount fader. A real 808 would have the amplitude sustain level drop to 0, giving it a really percussive feel, but I keep the sustain level high to make the bass louder for longer. In 1994, Renegade, aka Ray Keith's Terrorist, was released on Moving Shadow, and it had a huge impact on the jungle scene with its Reese bassline, so called because it was sampled from Reese, aka techno pioneer Kevin Saunderson's Just Want Another Chance. The Just Want Another Chance bass is a long legato bass, much like a sine sub, but it also had a menacing, pulsating, yet smooth energy in the low mids. In an interview I conducted for Music Radar, Kevin says he created the original Reese using a Casio CZ series phase distortion synth, but it's a relatively simple sound that we can certainly recreate in Serum. In fact, I already did in a previous YouTube video. I'm a busy guy, so let's just watch that video again, yeah? Let's make a jungle Reese with Serum, RC20 and Pro Q. We want 2 sawtooth oscillators detuned up and down 28 cents. We run them through an 18 dB low-pass filter at 637 Hz with a resonance of 18%, key tracking turned on and a drive level of 14%. Next we add RC20 with the distortion mode set to zap and a level of 64% with no flux. Plus we add some vinyl noise, I suggest a level of 24%. Pro Q cuts at 350 Hz, boosts at 150 Hz, and there's a bit of high shelf to bring out the vinyl noise. Here's how it sounds compared to Renegade Terrorist. I'm Tim Cant, please like and subscribe for more quick production tips. Alright, a couple of areas I could have improved it. 1. Turning off the random phase to give it a more consistent sound, and 2. The authenticity of the result would have been improved by resampling a note and playing it back as a sample, which would have made the rhythm of the swelling a touch more accurate. Here's what it sounds like if I make those changes. The Terrorist Reese was sampled many times on tracks like DJSS's Black, Remark RIP DJ Hype Remix, and Amtrak by Trace and Nico. By the tech step era, producers began distorting the Reese bass more and more, and in Ed Rush Optical and Fierce's Cut Slow, this arguably reached its apotheosis, with the sound being distorted into a full frequency range filling monster. By this point, I think it's fair to say we've entered full-on drum and bass territory, and here's where Reese becomes a byword for a huge detuned legato synth sound that's not just confined to the bass frequencies. This also marks the start of where producers start splitting sounds into sub and top layers, which is a useful technique for not just sound design, but also for making it easier to get everything balanced in the mix. I feel this is beyond the remit of the topic of this video, so I've included links in the description for Strangers recreating Locust Reese by Ed Rush and Optical for 2020, and Fanu's create a healthy sub bass with Serum, fix the Reese bass / 2 oscillator sub bass drift problem, which are great videos, big up to those guys. As we've examined the harmonic properties of sine, square and triangle waveforms already, let's see what sawtooth waveforms look like. They have both odd and even harmonics, which gives them a very full, rich sound, and this is why they're used for full frequency range sounds like Reese's and supersaws. Later in 1994, another Moving Shadow release created another legendary bass sound. This time it was the turn of Dead Dred with their anthem Dred bass. Hardcore tracks often had low-pass filters closing over square waveforms to create a bass sound like this. Dred bass featured a low pass filter opening over a square waveform, giving it a reversed quality. There had been a couple of tracks that predate Dead Dred that have had reversed bass lines, specifically Hypron Experience Lords of the Null Lines Foul Play featuring Randall remix, which has a delayed reverse bass on the breakdown, though that's more of an effect rather than an actual bass line, and Baby Kane's Jungle Warriors, which uses a reversed reggae bass line sample. However, Dred bass was the first tune to really be focused around this type of sound. Its lazy, sinister swells of bass contrast with the high-speed layered breaks, and the Dred bass sound became a staple of jungle and later speed garage, most notably in Double 99's Rip Groove. Making the sound is pretty straightforward. We set oscillator 1 to a square waveform, turn down the random phase, then activate the filter and set its mode to MG Low 24. This 24 dB filter has a steeper roll-off than the default 12 dB filter, and this is a big part of what gives the patch its sound. I activate filter pitch tracking and set the cutoff to 309 Hz. At this point we're just hearing the sub-frequencies because the filter cutoff is so low. We need something to open it, so I set LFO1 to modulate the filter cutoff frequency with a modulation amount of 46. I set the LFO mode to envelope and turn off its BPM sync. I set the rate to 2.3 Hz, and now it's a matter of setting up the envelope to get the right feel. This is close, but there's something missing. What gives the Dred bass sound its edge is resonance on the filter. I set the resonance to 45%. Finally, to beef things up, I set the drive to 19%. Here's how it sounds compared to the original. In 1996, Wobble bass emerged as the hot new sound in tracks such as Busy Bee and Marvelous Kane featuring Tempo O'Neill, Every Day, and Shimon and Andy C, Quest. However, this kind of bass sound can be heard in tracks as early as 1993's The Trooper by DJ Hype, which I feel was really ahead of its time in a few ways and is a bit of an underrated gem. Busy Bee has a video demonstrating his take on the sound. I'll link that in the description. Respect to Busy Bee. Here's my version in Serum, which uses volume modulation rather than detuning. I start by setting oscillator 1 to a sine wave and turning down the random phase. I then turn down the level of the oscillator to 23%. This makes it very quiet, but we're going to use an LFO to make it louder again. I set LFO1 to modulate the level knob with an amount of 69. I set the LFO to trigger with note start and turn off the BPM sync. I want to saturate this sound a bit, so I activate the filter, turn the cutoff all the way up and set the drive to 78. I also activate mono voicing so that I can only play one note at once. So now we have a functional wobble bass, but the wobble is at the same tempo no matter what note we play. I prefer it if the wobble changes tempo depending on the note played, as that gives us some rhythmic variety. I set the LFO1 rate to 1 Hz. In the modulation matrix, I assign the note number to LFO1 rate with the modulation amount of 88. Now, higher notes will have a faster wobble, and you can tweak things to your liking by adjusting the LFO1 rate and the note number to LFO1 rate modulation amount. If you're looking to get the falling wobble style used in the 90s, then it's a case of tweaking your pitch bend and LFO rate to get the perfect feel. Well, that is more than enough jungle bassline fun for one video. If you're feeling lazy or have forgotten everything you've just seen, there are some serum patches to download in the description. Other than that, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you later. Hey, what's up? Tim Cant here, and in this video we're going to look at a beginner's guide to rave stabs. We're going to kick off with some cultural and technological context, and then we're going to look at how you can make some of these sounds for yourself in various bits of software. Lots of links to the tunes mentioned in the video description, so without further ado, let's get rocking. Rave stabs come in many flavours. For the purposes of this video, we're going to use a broad definition of rave stabs that includes a variety of sounds such as sampled staccato chords, such as this stab from LA Styles' James Brown is Dead. Punchy bass stabs, as heard in Wax Doctor's A New Direction. And legato synth leads such as the Hoover from Human Resources' Dominator. These sort of sounds have a variety of sources. Some rave stabs might come straight out of a synth, some are sampled synths, and some are samples from records made with real instruments. What these disparate sounds have in common is that they all use digital music making technology in some form, be it digital sampling in the case of James Brown is Dead, digital synthesis in the case of A New Direction, or hybrid digital analog synthesis in the case of Dominator. This is why we only started to hear these kinds of sounds appearing during the 80s and 90s, when digital hardware began to enter the mainstream. Until the late 1970s, music production was an almost entirely analog process. The closest thing to a sampler was the mellotron, a keyboard which used tape loops to play back recordings of acoustic instruments. The result is an uncanny approximation of an acoustic sound with a dreamlike quality, and you can hear the mellotron in effect making the flute sound at the start of the Beatles' Strawberry Fields Forever. During the late 20th century, improvements in integrated circuit technology resulted in more affordable and powerful microchips or silicon chips. And in 1979, the world's first digital audio workstation, the Fairlight CMI, or Computer Musical Instrument, made its debut. It cost an enormous amount of money, especially for 1979, between £18,000 and £60,000, depending on which model, but it offered the ability to record, manipulate, and sequence audio digitally. The CMI was the progenitor of the computer-based DAWs most of us use today. As you'd hope for such an expensive piece of equipment, the CMI included a library of preset sounds, including a patch known variously as Orc5 and Orc2. This is the original orchestral hit, and it features a snippet of Stravinsky's The Firebird Suite, where the whole orchestra plays a big, frequency-filling staccato chord. According to the Vox video, the sound that connects Stravinsky to Bruno Mars, this hit is taken from this recording. Let's take a listen to a vinyl reissue of that record. Here I've applied some processing to my sample to get a more lo-fi sound like the CMI. Let's compare it with the Orc2 patch from Arturia's plugin recreation, CMIV. I think we can say that this particular recording is indeed the source of the Fairlight stab. So I would argue that by several metrics this is the OG rave stab. It was composed in 1919, recorded in 1965, and sampled in or before 1979. It can be heard on early rave tracks such as Jazz and the Brothers Grimm featuring Baby D and MC Juice's Casanova the Raising Hell mix from 1989. Here's the patch courtesy of Arturia's contemporary plugin recreation, CMIV. We can play this sound chromatically, that is, up and down the keyboard, but most early adopters of this sound played it at a single pitch as an accent rather than as a melody or chord progression. An early use of the patch could be heard on Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Forces' Planet Rock. Other sonic futurists who employed the patch include Kate Bush on The Dreaming and Freeze on IOU. All three of these tracks were released in 1982, and the sound of sampling had become a part of the cultural zeitgeist, with many other manufacturers of digital music technology including similar sounds in their hardware over the following decades. Incidentally, the CMI orchestral stab is possibly one of the first cases of digital sampling infringing on copyright. Certainly, the records made with the CMI weren't endorsed by Stravinsky. So, as with jungle breakbeats, using bits of someone else's music is very much a part of rave stab's DNA. A big part of what made rave music possible was the increased affordability and availability of electronic music making hardware. During the 80s, electronics became increasingly affordable. Relatively cheap and cheerful analog synths such as the Roland TB303 and SH101 could be picked up for a few £100 new in the early 80s, and became even cheaper when they swiftly went out of fashion thanks to a new wave of digital synths. In 1983, Roland's rivals Yamaha launched their hugely successful DX7. It was many times the price of the SH101, but it had an ace up its sleeve. It was a digital synth capable of both frequency modulation, FM, and additive synthesis, and it could make acoustic instrument sounds that were light years ahead of the competition in terms of how realistic they sounded. For many musicians, analog synths became obsolete overnight. However, FM synth supremacy was short-lived. In 1987, Roland struck back with their D50, a sample-based instrument that was capable of much more convincing impressions of acoustic instruments, plus a wealth of other sounds including analog synth-style patches that were more polished and involved than one could hope to get from an analog synth. The game had changed again, but the D50 itself would be quickly toppled by the legendary Korg M1. Unlike the D50, which supplemented its sampled waveforms with synthesis, 1988's M1 was entirely sample-based and featured a selection of truly timeless patches that have had enduring popularity since the synth's release. Sample-based instruments were here to stay, and around this time samplers were becoming more affordable too, with units such as the Akai S1000 featuring CD-quality 44.1 kHz 16-bit sampling, which was astounding for the time. Cheaper samplers were available too, and at the lower end of digital music production, the Commodore Amiga offered 4 channels of 8-bit audio playback. In the early 90s, you could acquire a Commodore A500, a Techno Sound Turbo audio interface, and a tracker to sample and sequence anything off a magazine cover disc for much less than the price of a hardware sampler. As mentioned, a side effect of all this relatively affordable and futuristic sounding digital kit meant that analog also ran such as the Roland TR-808 and TR-909 drum machines tumbled in price. The stage was set for an electronic music revolution. The increasing accessibility of music technology in the late 80s and early 90s coincided with an exciting time in dance music, which saw a wealth of new cross-pollinating genres such as Chicago House, Detroit Techno, Bleep, Hip-Hop, Dancehall, Belgian Techno, Italo House, Ambient House, Baggy, and more. Post-1988's Acid House Summer of Love, these genres began to coalesce into a genre that took the biggest and baddest elements from each of them, hardcore rave. To make hardcore, you didn't need a studio, the ability to play an instrument, or even an understanding of music theory. All you needed was a sampler, a sequencer, some records or CDs to sample, and the desire to make some noise. Some of hardcore's most enduring anthems, such as Manic's Feel Real Good, Two Bad Mice, Hold It Down, and Asen, Close Your Eyes, are essentially collages of other records recontextualized into a new high-energy format designed with pure danceability in mind. Sampling had already been pioneered by hip-hop producers, and a popular hip-hop technique heard in tracks such as Boogie Down Productions' South Bronx would be to sample a staccato funk brass chord or stab. Hip-hop brass stabs would typically be played at just a single pitch, much like early uses of the CMI orchestral hit. Rave and techno producers began to take synth chords and play them back chromatically. This allowed them to quickly create a big sound, and if you're a DJ, you likely already had multiple 12s that you could source suitable synth chords from. An early example of this is Kevin Saunderson sampling Nitro Deluxe's Let's Get Brutal for Inner City's Big Fun. You can hear famous examples of big rave stabs in tracks such as Outlander's Belgian techno stomper Vamp, which samples Landlord's housey I Like It blowout dub, and Too Bad Mice's hardcore breakbeat anthem Bomb Scare, which samples Neon's breakbeat house track Don't Mess With This Beat instrumental. The UK's hardcore rave scene took particular inspiration from Belgian techno labels such as R&S. Many Belgian techno tunes such as Jesse Deep's Shum, Spectrum's Brazil and Second Phase's Mentasm were sampled prolifically, and you'll likely recognise many of these sounds even if you haven't heard the original tracks before. Post-hardcore rave, these sounds continue to be used in genres such as drum and bass, happy hardcore, hardcore techno, hard house, new school breaks and garage. Rave musicians didn't just limit themselves to sampling tracks in their own or adjacent genres, and stab samples could come from a wide variety of sources. The digital editing capabilities of sampling hardware made it possible for producers to very tightly edit the start and end points of a sample, getting an aggressive sound with a snappy attack.
Most music.
Producers found this technique and other sample processing tricks worked well on their own synth sounds too. In a 1992 interview with Future Music magazine, The Prodigy's Liam Howlett mentions discussing Roland Alpha Juno Hoover sampling with Joey Beltram, the producer of Mentasm. This technique of processing a sample or synth sound, then recording the processed version as a new sound, became known as resampling. Much like jungle breakbeats, stabs would get sampled by producers to make a record, then that record would get sampled by other producers. Each generation of sampling would alter the character of the stab, often giving it a grittier quality. Here are the 3 different versions of the stab tuned to the same pitch, so you can better hear the textural differences introduced by each generation of sampling and processing. Sometimes elements would be added that can be heard in later tracks, such as the pad used by Shades of Rhythm to complement the Patti LaBelle vocal that can be heard on the later Blame track. Here they are, tuned to the same pitch. Because of their often synthetic origins, it can be tricky to work out where particular rave stabs actually originate from. So, where the stab has an easily attributable source like the Patti LaBelle vocal, it's much easier to be definitive. Working out where synthetic rave stabs come from can be a lot trickier, though there are a lot of resources online discussing potential stab sample sources and attempting to recreate stabs. In the case of the actual source of the Brazil stab, the Ravey Stabs video creating the Spectrum Brazil Rave stab on an XB30 seems to be close at the very least. Big up Ravey Stabs. There are many ways to acquire rave stabs. If you're after authenticity, then you can sample from vinyl, and the character of the results will be affected by the state of the record you're sampling from, the turntable and mixer you use, and what you sample into. Sampling from CD will get you a clean sound, and modern operating systems allow you to drag and drop audio files directly from CD onto your desktop. Some classic sample CDs from back in the day feature familiar rave stabs. However, while I find vintage sample CDs to be a good source of breaks, I don't tend to use them for stabs as they usually feature quite limited selections. Even the legendary 0G data files volume 1 to 3 aren't a particularly good source of Rave stabs, so instead I recommend the excellent, convenient and free Rave Generator 2 plugin, and I've included a link to this in the description. I recommend Rave Generator 2 to everyone from beginners to veterans, and if you're itching to get cracking, it's a great place to start. The samples in Rave Generator 2 aren't pre-tuned, so you'll have to tune them yourself, just as you'd have had to back in the day. Rave stabs are often chordal, and if you're inexperienced, you might find it hard to work out the correct tuning. I recommend the awesome free Blue Lab Audio Chroma for pitch analysing audio, and this plugin will show you not only what notes are present in the audio signal, but also how close to concert pitch they are. You can find a link to this plugin in the video description. You can sample Rave stabs from lossy files. I feel like this is a less egregious sin than sampling breaks from a lossy format, but I still try not to make a habit of it. If you're a real degenerate, you can even sample stabs from YouTube videos, but I personally would avoid this route if at all possible. Another solution is to make your own stabs with real or virtual synths, and in the following chapters we'll look at how to recreate various stab sounds in virtual instruments with varying degrees of accuracy. The stab from Landlord, I Like It blowout dub was ubiquitous in the early days of hardcore, and you can hear on tracks such as SL2's DJs Take Control, Alternate's Evaporate, and DJ Seduction's Hardcore Heaven. In the Gearspace thread, I think I found the real origin of the Landlord stab. User Mr. Varaldo details his theory that the source of the Landlord stab is a clavinet ensemble preset from the Yamaha DX7. Specifically, it's the clav-once patch from the US version of the synth that can be found on ROM 3A. I put a link to a page where you can download the DX7 ROMs in the description. We can load these ROMs into a compatible FM synth, such as Dext or FM8. If we load the clav-once patch up and play a single note, we get a harmonically rich sound. The patch is based around 2 voiced operators, each modulated by 2 unvoiced operators. Let's hear how they sound individually. To me, this doesn't sound much like the Landlord stab when played monophonically, but if we sequence a minor chord with a velocity of 80 with an extra root note on the 2 octaves below, the sound starts to take shape. Let's add some sample rate reduction with D16 group decimal 2, which will emulate the sound of an old school hardware sampler. Now I resample a stab by loading it into a sampler, and use a touch of 12 dB low pass filter envelope to shape the sound. I turn up the amplitude envelope attack to soften the start of the sound. To get close to the effects on the original Landlord record, I apply some compression, EQ, chorus, delay and reverb. On the Landlord record, it sounds like the clav sound is led with a synth bass, so I use Serum to make a square oscillator bass patch with a rapidly closing low pass filter to play the same MIDI as the sampled chord. We could use a lo-fi tape emulation to get closer to the late 80s sound of the record, but what I think is more interesting is experimenting with the original chord. For example, we can change the minor Landlord stab into a major stab, resample it, and now the original riff has a happy hardcore feel. Let's try a variation on the minor chord. Originally we used a velocity of 80, but what if we were to use a higher velocity level for a more harmonically rich sound? This gives us a more aggressive tone, and we can sculpt the sound further by adjusting the sampler's filter settings. Many rave tracks use synths with detuned saw oscillators to create rich lead sounds. You can hear these kinds of sounds in Terrorize's It's Just a Feeling, Ason's Close Your Eyes XXX mix, and Bizarre Inc.'s Plutonic. You can make a version of this sound in practically any virtual analog synth. For my version, I'm going to use Arturia Mini V to get an authentic old school analog feel. It even comes with a preset that's exactly the sound we're looking for, Saw Detune. This is just two sawtooth oscillators slightly detuned. I sequence a long note on C1 and bounce it to audio. I then load this into a sampler, then loop it, and set it to a single voice so that it can only be played monophonically. I add a saturation effect to rough up the sound a bit and make it feel a bit more upfront, and I like to use a band notch filter on this sound, which I feel gives it a bit of a sinister quality. You can modulate this to get that old school era articulation. You can add another dimension to the sound's movement by adding a phaser effect. Glide or portamento will give you a snaking feel that you might enjoy. Automating a parametric EQ can also give the sound a touch of a vocal quality. Roland's hybrid digital analog Alpha Juno synth features a preset that fans of rave music will recognise instantly. What the? This kind of sound has become known as a Hoover, and as we've already mentioned, it's the defining sound of rave classics such as Human Resources' Dominator, and the same or at least very similar sounds could be heard in Second Phase's Mentasm and Jesse Deep's Shum. This preset was created for the Alpha Juno 1's 1986 launch by legendary sound designer and Spectrasonics founder Eric Persing. I asked Eric about the sound in an interview I conducted for Computer Music magazine, and he told me that the over-the-top noise was created as a quote-unquote joke. Little did Persing realise that this humorous novelty would become an iconic part of electronic music culture. The key to the What the patch is something that only the Alpha Juno and a few other synths can do, saw width modulation. Yuhi's Diva does a cool impersonation of the Alpha Juno oscillator, but to make this sound I'm going to use a dedicated Alpha Juno emulation, Audio Realism's Redominator. Redominator has a built-in Hoover patch called Kiss Myself, but I'm not a fan of the velocity sensitivity assignment in this patch, and I've got my own take on it that I'm going to run you through because we can make a couple of other sounds as part of the process. First we initialise the patch. Then we set the saw oscillator to 3, which is the mode that features width modulation. We can hear the width modulation if we turn the pulse width modulation amount up. Let's set the PWM to 127 and the PWM rate to 98. Let's bring the pulse oscillator in too, set it to 3, which also puts it in width modulation mode. Next we're going to add the sub, so set the sub level in the DCO panel to 3, and set the sub to shape 5. Now we activate the chorus. Turn the chorus on and set its level to 83. Now we have a rich Hoover sound that really came into vogue in the era of stompy happy hardcore and can be heard on tracks such as Force and the Evolution's Simply Electric. We want this sound to be monophonic, so turn polymode off. Turn porta mode on so that overlapping notes glide between each other. You can control how long the notes take to glide with the porta time fader. This gives us a sound much like the lead noise in Agent Orange's Sounds a Bit Flaky jungle mix. To get the Hoover feel, we need to add some pitch modulation. First, let's set the envelope. Set L1 to 50, T2 to 50, L2 to 127, T3 to 62, and L3 to 50. In the pitch panel, turn the env up to 127. Now the patch's pitch will follow the envelope we've created. You can get some great effects playing this sound legato and, for example, switching between octaves. This patch is pretty wild, and as mentioned earlier, producers such as Joey Beltram resampled it and applied further manipulation in their samplers, so this is a great jumping off point for experimentation. You can hear a specific housey organ patch in Psychotropic Hypnosis, Enjoy Malfunction, and Neon Don't Mess With This Beat instrumental / Too Bad Mice Bomb Scare. This patch is the Elec.Organ patch from the Casio CZ101 digital phase distortion synth. We can recreate this sound in software using Arturia's CZV. In the KVR audio thread, Arturia CZV preset collection converted, possible from hardware, posted by Kane123, another user known as Breakbeats, posted a converted preset bank from the Casio CZ101. This features the Elec.Organ patch, which is instantly recognisable as the Hypnosis stab. There are 3 elements of this sound that give it its character: timbre, attack, and vibrato. Let's reverse engineer the patch to see how it all works. I'll start with the default template. Phase distortion works by adding harmonics to a sine wave, which is basically the opposite of subtractive virtual analog synthesis, where you use filters to remove harmonics. As I turn up the DCW, or digitally controlled wave parameter, the sine morphs into a sawtooth. The CZV has 2 waveform selectors for each oscillator, or line as they're known in the synth. These control the shape of the first cycle of the waveform and the shape of the second cycle of the waveform. I set the first waveform to double sine and the second waveform to pulse. I duplicate this line onto the second line and turn up the octave detune to 2. This gives us the basic organ sound, and we have that timbre we're looking for. The Elec.Organ patch has a bit of punch at the start of the sound, and this is achieved by quickly modulating the DCW value. This gives us a little burst of harmonics at the beginning of the sound. This is the attack we wanted. The final touch is some vibrato. I turn up the vibrato depth to around the mid-20s. This recreates the straight-up preset as heard in Hypnosis, with its organ-style timbre, harmonic attack, and expressive vibrato. The Neon / Too Bad Mice version of the stab sounds as if it features another component, which I haven't been able to identify. If you have any idea what it might be, please let us know in the comments. Some rave tracks feature sounds that combine the punchiness of a stab with the low-end weight of a bass. Tracks that I'd include in this category include Hyperon Experience, Lord of the Null Lines Foul Play Remix, Andy C, Something New Part 2, and Wax Doctor, A New Direction. The Lord of the Null Lines bass sound is straightforward to make, and you can use any virtual analog synth to make it. All we need to do is set up a square oscillator and have a resonant 24 dB filter close over it. Instead, start by setting an oscillator to a square shape and turn the random phase down. Activate the filter and set it to MG Low 24. Activate filter key following and turn the resonance up to 59%, which will help emphasize the movement when we start to modulate the filter cutoff frequency. Turn the filter cutoff frequency down to 109 Hz, then route envelope 2 to the cutoff. Set the modulation amount to 37. Turn envelope 2 sustain all the way down. Now drag up on the decay curve to make it shallower. We can turn this sound into something akin to the Something New Part 2 bass using unison detune on the oscillator. Set the number of unison voices to 4 and turn the random phase all the way back up. Due to the pan-unison voices, this sound is quite wide, so I suggest using a width-reducing plugin such as Ableton Live's utility. As for the A New Direction bass, I struggled to recreate this in software. There's something about the resonance of the sound that I couldn't get quite right, either with virtual analog or FM synthesis. So I sought help from jungle techno legend Ron Wells, aka Basement Records' Jack Smooth, who handled production and mixing duties on the record. He told me something that I should have guessed. The bass sound on A New Direction was created using the wave shaping functions on the Korg 01W, a machine used on countless classic Jack Smooth productions. The 01W has unique wave shaping capabilities that thus far haven't been recreated in software, so here's hoping that Korg will bless us with a software based version of this amazing synth at some point. In the absence of a virtual 01W, let's check out a couple of variations on this sound that don't use wave shaping but still get vaguely close to the A New Direction sound. The first version uses the rather cool and free PG8X plugin by Martin Luders, a virtual analog synth based on the Roland JX8P. Set oscillator 1 to the square shape, then in the filter panel set the VCF frequency to 28 and the VCF resonance to 54. Now turn up the key follow to full and the OMV to 53. Set envelope 1 sustain to 53. Now return to the VCF panel and change the VCF dynamics mode to 2. Add a touch of delay sync to 2 16th notes and some reverb, and you've got something that comes close to the New Direction sound. I feel the New Direction sound is a little more FM-like, so let's try using FM to see what we can come up with. I'm going to use Native Instruments FM8, but we can get a similar sound in practically any FM synth. Activate operator E and set its ratio to 4. Route it to operator F with a value of 55. Turn down operator E's decay and sustain, and you get that characteristic reduction in the higher harmonics over a short period, giving us a techie bass tone. We can add a subtle resonance style effect by using operator E to modulate itself. For more bass, we can activate another oscillator and route it directly out to give us a weighty sine sub. This sound is a little clicky at the end, so in the easy panel, turn up the amplitude envelope release a touch. Again, not quite perfect, but more convenient than using an 01W. Well, that was an obscene amount of hardcore noise. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And hey, if you want to work out whether I'm chatting a load of nonsense or not, why don't you check out the various links to my tunes in the video description. Apart from that, we're done, so I'll see you later. Hey, Tim Cant here. In this video, we're going to be looking at jungle techno, a beloved style of rave music. First, we're going to kick off with a bit of context, and then we're going to look at how you can make a tune in this style in software. In the video description, you'll find a huge playlist of awesome tunes, and also links to my online tutoring services. But enough about that for the moment. Let's rock to the groove. Jungle techno is a term that has been in use since the very early 90s. Noise Factory's track Jungle Techno on Ibiza Records was typical of the pioneering jungle label's early output, featuring big sub-bass along with up-tempo breaks and 4x4 kick drums. Discogs lists the release date of this track as 1991. Additionally, Jumpin' and Pumpin' released the first of many compilations in the Jungle Techno series in early 1992, and Jungle Techno Volume 1 features many early jungle artists including Potential Bad Boy, Two Bad Mice, LTJ Bookham and Noise Factory themselves. You can also hear Top Buzz's MC, Mad P, use the term in many sets, notably their Quest November 92 set. This was famously sampled for DJ Tactics' The Way remix.
Check 1, check 2. Now Quest, are you really ready for some blood clot jungle techno? Are you ready for some blood clot jungle techno? Alright, bad boys them in the house.
However, jungle techno would come to take on a more specific meaning than simply tracks that featured a combination of breaks, bass, and 4x4 kick drums. In the UK rave scene of 1992, breakbeat hardcore was king. Catchy, anthemic breakbeat-driven tracks such as Awesome 3's Don't Go, SL2's On a Ragatip, and Ason's Trip to the Moon achieved rave scene and crossover success with their funky, high-speed breakbeats and big hooks. As 1992 progressed, many hardcore ravers were looking for something edgier, and darkside tracks such as Metalhead's Terminator and Edge of Darkness Come Together became the new fashion. These tracks were as breakbeat focused and hectic as their hardcore rave predecessors, but there was also a contrasting, deeper sound emerging. Two popular tracks in particular epitomise this style: Top Buzz's Living in Darkness and Wax Doctor's A New Direction. The tracks combined common hardcore elements, breakbeats, programmed drum machine rhythms and heavy bass lines, but with restrained technical precision influenced by European and Detroit techno. Rather than focusing on familiar stab samples, big musical hooks and recycled vocal snippets from adjacent genres, jungle techno's appeal was its slickly programmed, rolling beats, energetic, techie bass lines, and innovative synth programming. Generally, when people use the term jungle techno, it's this specific style that they're referring to, rather than just simply hardcore records that use a combination of 4x4 kicks and breakbeats. Both Living in Darkness and A New Direction were produced and mixed by Jack Smooth, aka Ron Wells, and released on the seminal Basement Records label run by Basement Phil Wells, no relation. Though many early jungle releases, including the early Ibiza Records catalogue, used a combination of breakbeats and 4x4 kick drums, Ron Wells literally took the genre in a new direction, with a focus on synthesis rather than sampling. While much hardcore rave in the early 90s was about sampling and resampling stabs from house and techno records, Ron's approach was to use his arsenal of synths to make his own tones. Many of the tracks he produced used the unique wave-shaping features of the Korg 01W synth to create fresh sounds that gave his productions a unique feel. As well as Top Buzz, Wax Doctor and Basement Phil, Ron produced jungle techno releases with many other rave legends including Alex Reese, Donovan Bad Boy Smith, and Loft Groover. Ron also ran the predominantly jungle techno-focused Sound Entity and Smooth labels, and his contribution to the advancement of hardcore rave and drum and bass in the 90s is significant, to put it mildly. If you're interested in hearing high-quality versions of Ron's music, I can't recommend his compilation album Jungle Techno Volume 1 highly enough. You can find a link to this in the description. In my personal opinion, tracks such as No 303, Plight of the Innovators and Minesweeper are transcendent works that showcase rave music's capacity for emotional depth as well as sonic sophistication, and these tracks helped pave the way for drum and bass in the early 90s. Ron also produced his fair share of atmospheric drum and bass and straight-up hardcore techno too, and you can hear some of these tracks in the playlist. Jack Smooth wasn't the only artist to produce tracks with jungle techno characteristics, and many other well-known rave producers and labels released tracks in this style. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but it does cover what I'd consider to be the essentials. A label that I feel gets overlooked for its contribution to the sound is DJSS's Formation Records, which released a wealth of outstanding jungle techno tracks by artists including Jumping Jack Frost, EQ, and DJs Tango and Ratty. Tango and Ratty were two of the DJs who really pushed the jungle techno sound, and they released some of the all-time jungle techno anthems on their own eponymous label. Tango also worked with DJ Fallout to create several more classic jungle techno tracks. Another well-known artist to create music to fall into the jungle techno category was Nookie, aka Cloud9, who put out several tracks in the style on Reinforced and Moving Shadow. Nookie's sadly unreleased 4x4 jungle techno version of Goldie's Inner City Life is my favourite version of the track by far, though it's understandable that his straight-up breakbeat version was the one that made the release, as jungle was experiencing crossover success at this time. Another prominent label to release tracks broadly in this style is Suburban Bass, who before dedicating themselves to jungle released a few techno stompers such as the Cubase techno remix of DJ Rap and Aston's Vertigo and Chrome and Time's breakbeat free roller Into the Night. Johnny L's euphoric "Ooh, I Like It" on XL recordings uses a very Basement-esque drum machine and bassline combo, and while the track is a little slow at around 140 BPM, most jungle techno sits in the mid 150s, it sounds great pitched up. XL also released a Top Buzz remix of the Prodigy's Weather Experience on the Wind It Up Rewound EP, and this is probably the closest the style got to mainstream exposure. Finally, Enjoy's Drumstruck EP is a mini jungle techno masterpiece, and was the final rave-centric release on Deconstruction. You can find all these tracks and many more in the playlist. By 1994, the UK hardcore rave scene had broadly split into jungle, happy hardcore and techno. Jungle techno, while sharing common elements with each of these styles, didn't neatly fit into any of them. However, there were still some excellent jungle techno releases popping up in 1994, such as Ratty's A Taste of Things to Come EP on Formation. Jack and Phil's Don't Beg for Love, Pure Basement Mix, and Nookie's Only You are both cool 4/4 jungle tracks that bridge the gap between jungle techno and the emerging jazzy drum and bass sounds. After this point, 4/4 beats wouldn't really crop up again in drum and bass until the early noughties, but in the meantime, happy hardcore was fully embracing 4x4 beats. In 1993, Basement Phil set up Homegrown Records to cater for the emerging happy sound, and this label featured several jungle techno releases, including System AD Volume 1, S&A Volume 1, and Format The Stomper. One record I particularly enjoy on Homegrown is DJ Chemistry meets Jack Smooth, Alchemy, which features a unique and masterful three-way fusion of atmospheric DnB vibes, jungle techno beats and bass, and hardcore-inspired pianos and vocal samples. Other Homegrown artists, DJs Unknown Sign and Temptation, took the jungle techno sound in a happy hardcore direction with their tracks on Hectic records like Moments in Time and The Anthem. These tunes are really musically and sonically creative, and quite different from a lot of the other tracks that were coming out at the time. These are well worth checking out, even if you're not usually partial to happy hardcore. Post-1994 jungle techno essentially dried up, though in recent years artists such as Worldwide Epidemic and DJB have begun to bring the sound back with tracks like Telemechanique, and Ron Wells has begun to release music again too, with several new tracks featured on the Jungle Techno Volume 1 compilation. If you're particularly interested in the Jack Smooth sound, the 2017 reissue of Fast Floor's On a Quest for Intelligence LP includes a list of the kit used by Ron back in the day. I've transcribed this list and you can find it in the video description. Most of these synths have software versions, though crucially not the Korg 01W. This synth has unique wave shaping capabilities that thus far can't be replicated on anything but the original hardware. Ron used this synth to create many of his trademark sounds, so if you really want to be authentic to the basement sound, it's an essential. But if you just want to make your own take on jungle techno, you can use whatever you like. It's possible to create jungle techno style tracks on pretty straightforward kit, and modern DAWs with their advanced sampling and synthesis capabilities are more than up to the task. So let's check out an example track. Here's a relatively simple jungle techno project I've made to show you a few techniques you might find useful when creating this type of music. I had a checklist of stuff that I wanted this track to have before I started, which included energetic, techno-style 909 drums, rolling breakbeats, big round bass, a lead synth that wasn't a big familiar stab sample, an acid line, and an intelligent pad breakdown. Finally, I wanted the track to be at 155 BPM because that's a typical 1993 rave tempo. For 909 drums, I use samples from Mars one-shots, which I've linked in the description. Here's the kick. I've monoized it, saturated it, and high-passed it at 45 Hz. Not all jungle techno tracks use an obvious open hat, but I feel the syncopation really boosts a track's energy level, so that's what I added next. I high-passed this one at 200 Hz. To complement the open hat, I used a simple closed hat pattern that plays on the first two 16th notes of each beat. I haven't swung the 16ths here, and this rigid rhythm provides a contrast with the breaks. Again, this sound has been high-passed at 200 Hz. For the clap, I've played it on the second and fourth beats of the bar and added some reverb, which gives it a little touch of techno flavour. I could have added more reverb and made the clap pattern more complex, perhaps with some delay, and if I were to flesh this track out more, that's certainly something I'd try. I play the ride on quarter notes, and this is high passed at 1.5 kHz to keep the low end of the mix clear for the kick to punch through. I wanted a crash as an episodic marker, but I didn't want to be too obvious, so it's quite quiet. I've high passed this at 300 Hz and added reverb to make it sound more atmospheric. I also added a snare drum fill. This is also high passed at 300 Hz. I sequenced a roll on 16th notes for the first two beats. I then tried a 32nd note roll for the next two beats, but it was a bit much, so instead I tried muting the 32nd notes. This results in 2 more bars of 16th note roll, but because each note stops halfway through the 16th, it sounds more staccato, and I enjoyed how it sounded, so I left it like that. For breakbeats, I wanted breaks that could sit behind the 909 and just roll along nicely without standing out too much. The first one I used is a funky drummer with some mild choppage, and this is high passed at 300 Hz. I'm not sure where this second break is from, but it's high passed at 300 Hz as well. I like to have more anonymous sounding breaks in tracks where I can because it makes them a little bit more interesting. That said, I think this is the Think Shaker here, and I've high-passed this at 2 kHz and used EQ to take down the crazy peaks in the top end. For the bass, I use Extra Record Serum playing a square oscillator with a 24 dB low-pass filter closing over it. I've used quite a high resonance level to get that round sound I wanted, and I've used some consecutive notes in the MIDI, which gives that sinister funky feel that works well in this style. The acid line, I use D17 group for Scion 2, which I feel has a great sound and a cool interface that's more straightforward than some other 303 clones I've tried. I start with an initialized patch and programmed F notes on every 16th to get a foundation to work from. Then I moved one of the notes and added some octave skips and slides and accents for a bit of flavour. I applied the built-in reverb to get that techno vibe and used a little touch of the diode clean distortion too. I automate the filter cutoff frequency to open up over 4 bars, which gives the sound an evolving feel. Next came the tricky part, trying to make a lead sound with a jungle techno vibe. I wanted to do this in the box, so using the Korg 01W was out. So I tried to make something with Serum. I failed, but I did come up with this nice little stereo unison pulse width modulation sequence that I felt had a little Johnny L vibe, so I kept it. This sound is high passed at 200Hz and has a touch of reverb. So at this point I tried one idea, failed, and was ready to give up on music making forever. However, I thought I'd check out some Native Instruments FM8 presets because I knew it had some harmonically interesting and solid bass sounds that I thought I might be able to crib some ideas from. So I did a little bit of preset diving and noticed that the sounds that were closer to what I was looking for used wave shapes other than the classic FM sine. So taking inspiration from the deep driving break preset, I made my own patch, which I was pleasantly surprised with. This patch features 2 operators, one of which is the 135 square with a ratio of 6, and this is modulated by an operator with a square shape and a ratio of 1. These both have a pretty quick drop in amplitude and are both routed to the output so you can hear both of them. In the master panel I've used 3 voices in the unison section with the detune and pan turned up, and there's a touch of analog in the quality panel as well. This patch is then high passed at 200Hz, has a little touch of phaser and delay on it, then some reverb is applied, which helps the sound feel 3-dimensional. For the pad, I turned to Nils K1V, which is a fantastic pay-what-you-want emulation of the Kawai K1 sampling and synthesis synth. This plugin is great for getting old-school workstation sounds, and I use the RSO patch to play some very straightforward intervals. This patch is high-passed at 300Hz and has a touch of delay and reverb on it. For the arrangement, I put for Scion 2 in host note mode, which means that I had to trigger the pattern I'd created for it to play, which is useful because otherwise it would simply play for the whole project, which would have been a bit much. In this mode you can get the pattern to start again on a new note, so for the differently coloured sections I stuttered the pattern, which gives it a bit of variety. I feel like the best way to explain the arrangement is to watch it play back in real time with no chat, so let's check it out. If I were to work on this track further, I'd extend the arrangement to 5 or 6 minutes in length and use that room to maybe add another techie synth sound with some modulation, a breakdown with some more kick and snare interplay, and the previously mentioned clap ideas. I'd also just try and make the arrangement sound more dynamic generally, maybe with more edits and change-ups, ideally just enough to make it feel as danceable as possible. Perhaps I'd add some FX, but they're not really that common in jungle techno, so I'd probably just focus on having more variety with the edits and fills. I feel with this style, chucking in too many elements could be really detrimental to the overall feel, so I'd try and restrain myself. Also, I'd spend ages fiddling around with a mixdown and maybe even try some subtle sidechain compression with a kick drum, but I'd want to avoid it sounding anachronistic, so again, restraint would be of the utmost importance. Okay, that is enough jungleistic technology for one video. Please check out the video description for a massive playlist. Also, notes on some of my forthcoming tunes and current releases, and a link to my online tutoring services. Also, please like and subscribe, and have fun making tunes, guys. I'll see you later. Hey, what's up? Tim Cant here, and in this video I'm going to take a look at atmospheric drum and bass. First I'm going to delve into the history and culture of the music, and then I'm going to break down one of my tracks, which is available for pre-order now, link in the description. Also in the description, chapter markers and a playlist of all the tunes mentioned. So without further ado, let's go. Atmospheric drum and bass is a direct evolution of hardcore rave. You can hear the roots of Atmo DnB in tracks as early as The Black Dog's Virtual, a breakbeat techno track, which Discogs lists as being from 1989.
World, I sit in my room, imagine the future.
Virtual was very much ahead of its time, featuring a relatively high BPM of just under 130, a combination of pure breakbeats and 4x4 beats, bouncing percussive bass and digital pads. Virtual was an influence on the early jungle sound, with both Joe and DJ Junk sampling the track for Darkside tunes in late '93. Another influential early tune is Open Mind Body Force, a Joey Beltran production from 1990 that also paired digital pads and breakbeats to great effect. It seems like this tune was a big influence on a young LTJ Bookham, specifically on one of his tracks on his first release, 1991's Delightful. A 4-track EP of tunes sampling Delight's house track Good Beat, mostly mashed up with other contemporary tracks. One version was a Body Force style track complete with big breaks, Korg M1 Universe pads, and a big 808 style bassline. I would argue this version is the earliest track that can be identified as proto-atmospheric DnB, but it would be a couple of years until the formula was truly refined. In the meantime, LTJ Bookham founded his own label, Good Looking, and continued to make techno-influenced, forward-looking hardcore tracks such as Demon's Theme, Listen, and his remix of Apollo 2's Atlantis. LTJ Bookham aside, there are a few tracks that I think stand out as good examples of Proto-atmo. Liquid's Liquid is Liquid remix from 1992 on XL Recordings, Body Snatch's The Strength, NeuroQuest from 1993 on Big City, and Omni Trio's Feel Good, also from 1993, on Candidate Recordings and later Moving Shadow. These records stood out from their contemporaries, focusing on creating deep, mysterious atmospheres that contrasted with the predominantly happy or dark binary of the hardcore at the time. Feel Good appears to be influenced by PBB's Dum Diddly Dum, a breakbeat house track from the US released in 1992. Dum Diddly Dum's combination of hot pants beats and two-note bossa-esque bassline would also crop up in another important record. In 1993, LTJ Bookham released Music, a track which crystallised the primordial atmospheric DnB sound and challenged the hardcore rave scene to reach new creative heights. Music is the first bona fide atmospheric DnB record. It This release represents year zero for atmospheric DnB, codifying its most important tropes with its clean breakbeats, rolling, percussive 808 bassline, sustained atmospheric chords, and a running time of over 10 minutes. Combining the energy of hardcore rave with the depth of techno, the atmosphere of ambient, and the emotion of house, Music created a template for atmospheric DnB that would be hugely influential over the following 30 years, and it's certainly one of the most influential pieces of underground music of all time. Back in 1993, the influence of music could be heard right away in tracks such as DJ Crystal's Meditation, Deep Blue's The Helicopter Tune, and Engineers Without Fear's Spiritual Aura. Another track from this era of this ilk is Omni Trio's remix of JMJ and Rich's Hall of Mirrors, which features a beat and bassline very similar to Music and Omni Trio's own Feel Good. By late 1993, the nascent jungle/drum and bass scene was developing at an incredible pace, with the style absorbing and recontextualizing a broad array of influences. From the raw emotional minimalism of Omni Trio's bleak Renegade Snares roasted roll-in mix, to the lush jazzy sampling of Ronnie Size and DJ Dye's music box, drum and bass was entering a belle epoque, where musical innovation was outpacing even the early hardcore rave era. Was this period of astonishing fecundity anything to do with the fact that the rave scene was, at this point, deeply unfashionable in the mainstream? I would say yes, and point to records such as 1994's Essence, Jazz Testament by Blame and Justice as evidence. It's a psychedelic fusion of Detroit techno vibes, jazzy synth sax noodling, and deep drum and bass grooves. I don't think records like this would have existed had rave continued to increase in mainstream popularity. By 1994, atmospheric DnB was in the ascendancy in the underground DnB scene, and buoyed by the success of releases such as Renegade Snares and Music, Moving Shadow and Good Looking put out classic after classic at this point. Tracks like Foul Play's Being With You, Easy Roller's Believe, and Hyacinth's Cold Fresh Air remix on Moving Shadow, and Queris aka Photek's Aquatic, Pesce's Piano Tune, and Parallel Worlds' Contagious on Good Looking. In late 1994, Bookham and Fabio launched their seminal club night Speed at London's Mars Bar. Here, forward-thinking DnB was the focus, unlike, say, Dreamscape raves, where you'd hear everything from bouncy techno to jump up. I was a bit young to go to Speed myself, but by all accounts, its existence aided DnB at developing a yet more sophisticated and experimental sound. By 1995, there were many other labels pushing the atmospheric sound forward, including Fabio's Creative Source, Basement Records, Precious Material, Renegade Recordings, Expressive, Metalheads, Street Beats, Lucky Spin, DJ and Timeless Recordings, amongst others. On a personal note, while I already knew and loved tracks by PFM and LTJ Bookham, having heard them played out by DJs like Kenny Ken on Kiss FM's Jungle Show, I didn't really know much about atmospheric DnB until Bookham himself played the show. On the 26th of July 1995, I heard Bookham play Kiss for the first time, and what I heard absolutely blew my mind. I could wax lyrical about it at length, but instead I suggest you check out the show for yourself, and there's a link in the description. In 1996, Good Looking Records partnered with London Records dance imprint FFRR to release the compilation album Logical Progression, a collection of new and classic tracks from Good Looking Records and its sister label Looking Good. And this also featured a mix from LTJ Bookham, featuring tracks from his labels and others, including Moax, Heart House, Moving Shadow, Photek and DJ Recordings. A certified banger, Logical Progression was a worldwide success, and helped the sound be heard globally. Another essential listen, I recommend tracking down a copy for the full experience, as generally the versions you'll find on YouTube have tracks cut for copyright reasons. Around this time, Bookham launched his own club night, Logical Progression. I was now old enough to attend Logical Progression nights at both Ministry of Sound and Turnmills. Logical Progression remains my favourite rave to this day. The music was excellent, the crowd was diverse and chill, the MCing, primarily provided by longtime Bookham collaborator Conrad, was top notch, and the venues were cool. At the end of 1996, Good Looking released Earth Volume 1, which included a mix of both fresh, atmospheric DnB gems and many down-tempo tracks with a more chilled-out instrumental hip-hop flavour, the first of their many forays into loungy chill-out vibes. The Good Looking organisation was really smashing it, and in addition to Good Looking and Looking Good, they began to launch various sub-labels. 1997 saw the arrival of PhD's Ascendant Grooves, Blame 720, Taylor's Nexus, and Intense's short-lived Diverse recordings, which sadly and ironically only had a single release. 1997 also saw the release of Logical Progression Level 2, this time mixed by Blame, and his mix took the atmospheric DnB sound into even deeper cosmic territory. In 1997, atmospheric DnB, itself a subgenre of DnB, was already developing distinct subgenres itself. The jazz sound had always been a big part of this style, and the early Creative Source releases by artists such as Carlito and Big Bud exemplify this flavour. While some jazzy DnB leaned more into jazz musically with more complex beats and chord progressions, the four-hero project Jacob's Optical Stairway's Fragments of a Lost Language is a good example of this. Straight up jazzy atmospheric DnB tended to revolve more around less involved chord sequences and groove focused beats, like Carlito's Heaven. The more spacey, techno-inspired sound of Logical Progression 2, retrospectively dubbed Technospheric DnB, was a contrast to this, at least in terms of the sonic textures used. I feel techno DnB is best exemplified by a pair of Scottish DnB acts, Future Engineers and KMC, who created a very specific and evocative sonic palette on tracks such as Life Support and Alpha Centauri. These tracks feature one-shot beats rather than jungleistic breaks, plus overtly synthetic-sounding musical elements, giving them a unique feel. In the early 21st century, the term drum funk, popularised by Paradox, came to be used to describe drum and bass tunes with a primarily organic feel and funky chop breaks, and I'd argue that this genre has its roots in jazzy and atmospheric DnB. Alaska and Seba's Back from Eternity is a great mix of atmospheric and drum funk flavours. Likewise, liquid funk, a term popularised by Fabio around the turn of the millennium, refers to a specific flavour of jazzy DnB with an energetic dancefloor-friendly feel, though these days those words have commercial connotations that liquid funk certainly didn't have back then. Primary Motive, Who Has the Jazz, is a good example of this style, and it's easy to see the roots of stuff like the accessible sound of Hospital records in tracks like this. The meaning of liquid funk became watered down over the following decades, and now liquid DnB can refer to the jazzy, atmospheric sound of labels like Jazzsticks, or the more poppy stuff like releases on Liquicity, which are pretty different. Getting back to the late 90s, atmospheric DnB reached its peak production value-wise, with Good Looking's increasingly slick cover art by the likes of Nick Purse from Propeller, culminating in a series of beautiful double-pack vinyl EPs. While some feel that atmospheric DnB was losing its shine at this point, my love for this era has only increased with time, and for me tracks such as Intense's Solar, Bookham's Twilight Voyage and Blue Martin's Santerre are timeless classics. Good Looking really made hay while the sun shone with tons of Logical Progression follow-ups, the Progression Sessions mix series, and tons of compilation album releases on the various sub-labels, but after the millennium, things gradually began to wind down. By this point, atmospheric DnB had been overtaken in popularity by liquid funk and the yet harder edge takes on the DnB sound provided by the likes of Bad Company and Pendulum. However, there were a few Atmo DnB labels pushing the sound, notably Focus. These days Focus focuses on an accessible, musical DnB sound, But when it started, it was a straight up techno label, and releases such as Drum Origin's Oracle and Jay Lazy's Zero are real Atmo bangers. Another label, Cadence, put out some great stuff during this era, particularly from Aural Imbalance, who's consistently been releasing Atmo bangers to this very day. That said, there was a dearth of Atmo DnB during the noughties, though things began to pick up again towards the end of the decade, with labels such as Fusion Digital, Warm Communications, Offworld, Spearhead, Soul Deep, Urban Chemistry and the various Triple Vision labels bridging the gap between classic atmospheric and contemporary liquid sounds. I feel like there are a ton of lesser known gems from around 2010, tracks like Seba's Dangerous Days, Fernie's Wasted Dreams and Thesis's Dreamscaper. I have to shout out a few of the artists and labels who helped keep the sound going during this era. So big ups to Scott Allen, Nookie, Soul Structure, Row Pieces, Madcap, Big Bud, Blade, Physics, Greek Boy Inner Self, Eschaton and Paul SG, amongst others for keeping the spirit of classic jazzy and atmospheric DnB alive. Since the lockdowns of the early 2020s, many genres of music have had something of a revival, and old school style atmospheric DnB is one of them. Distinct from contemporary liquid DnB in that it's slower, with less of a focus on loud, hyper-engineered production and more space in the mix for atmospherics, Atmo DnB now seems to have its own mini-scene with labels like Violet Nights, Ocbron, Deep Jungle and Spatial not just putting out music, but actually delivering full-on vinyl releases. Even some veteran artists from back in the day such as Jamie Myerson and KMC have been making new music, and the scene is in a great place. It's a good time to be an atmospheric DnB fan, with classic re-releases like DJ Trace's By Any Means Necessary, FPD Project's Journeys and Tango Spellbound readily available, and cracking new tracks such as Future Engineer's Immersive, Aural Imbalance's Aurealis and ASC's Mirage providing fresh beats for us to get our teeth into. I was even more surprised to see younger music fans getting into atmospheric DnB, thanks in part to weird stuff like Intense's Only You becoming a meme, and people who grew up with DnB influenced PS1 and PS2 era video game soundtracks getting into making music themselves. There does appear to be a bit of confusion over what constitutes various styles, particularly over the difference between breakcore and atmospheric DnB, which I do find a bit odd as breakcore and atmospheric DnB really don't share much commonality at all. Hopefully videos like this one will make it easier for newcomers to atmospheric DnB to educate themselves about it. By listening to early atmospheric classics such as LTJ Bookham's Music and Horizons, we can hear that like other early hardcore and jungle records, they're predominantly sample based, with the addition of sampling and synthesis workstation keyboard sounds for pads and leads. So, it's nothing too complex, and the great news is that sampling, processing and mixing can all be handled by any modern DAW in the box. If you're interested in making Atmo DnB, you'll likely want to use some breakbeats, and you can find out more about those in my video, A Beginner's Guide to Jungle Breakbeats. As for the pad and lead sounds, you might find my video Atmospheric DnB Pads Deconstructed interesting, as this takes a look at how these sort of sounds work. But if you're in a rush, I will say that sampling and synthesis based instruments such as the Roland JV1080 and Korg Triton are ideal for this, and these two are available in plug-in form, so check those out if you'd rather not start forking out for vintage hardware. Also, Omnisphere is awesome for this sort of thing too. If you'd like to include sampled elements like sax, flute and vocals in your tracks, then sampling from old records and sample CDs is a great way to go. And I'd recommend that over sampling from YouTube with its lossy compression algorithms. Also, Splice is good for that kind of thing, though you will have to dig a bit to find the best sounds. There are plenty of jazz-based packs on there for instrument sounds, and R&B and house packs for vocals. Okay, for this part of the video, I'm going to break down one of my tracks to show you how an atmospheric drum bass tune is made. And I'm going to do it live. who knows what's going to happen? Nothing too awful, I hope. So this track is Chronicle, feature fragments. This should be available for pre-order now as part of the Time and Space EP on Curvature. Big up ASC for sorting that out. Nice one. So yeah, let's just check this tune out. So we're here in the project. You'll notice I've got a bunch of other tunes in here. That's because I do a lot of referencing. If you've checked out some of my other videos, you'll know I'm pretty evangelical about referencing. I find it terribly useful. So what have I got? I've got Aurealis by Aural Imbalance in here. I've got Mirage by ASC in here, both on Spatial, great label. Also KMC System. And the reason I referenced this tune is this tune ended up sounding a lot like System. But you know, hey, if you're gonna be influenced to a great degree by something, might as well be something good. So yeah. Listen to some KMC, it's wicked. And also I've got one of my own tracks in here, trying to get a consistent sound. And also, when I'm finishing my tracks, I will drag them into a big project of all of those tunes of that style that I've made. And then I can kind of like really see where it sits, you know, amongst all the other stuff I've made. And I can make sure I'm getting a consistent sound that is hopefully all right. And, you know, all these tracks have been routed directly to the external out, bypassing the master. Because on the master, I've got a clipper to make things nice and loud. Then I've got a gain to bring it down to. So what I've done for the pre-mastering is I've turned the clipper off. Then I've turned the gain down, so I get a nice like -6 dB out. So in fact, if we bring up Voxengo Span, you'll see if we play a bit of this, it's peaking about -6, and that's a good, you know, good ballpark sent to a mastering engineer. And then after that, I've got VSX, which isn't active. And I like to reference using that as well. I find VSX with the club setting, let me bring it up actually, pretty cool for kind of getting imagining what it's sounding like in a big empty club. Generally, if I'm playing out in a club, it'll be empty, so that's good to know. But anyway, yes, I mean, in all seriousness, it's good for like hearing, making sure the beats are coming through, making sure the bass is kind of like tight enough that it'll sound all right in a kind of, you know, relatively reverby environment. So, okay, let's look at the tunes. We've got the clipper turned off. Everything's going to be hitting a not crazy volume. That's great. So first we'll look at the beats. I mean, beats are generally what I try and do first. Often I will end up going and redoing the beats at the end of a tune. I think with this tune, it kind of, the beats were sounding all right first. And I'll tell you why, because I started out with a cracking beat that is practically cheating. So this is a breakbeat off the Breakpoints, the obscure Breakpoint sample library. And this is a breakbeat that I labeled Set Speed back in the day because it was used on a DJ Crust tune, Set Speed, funnily enough. And I believe this is the Versatile Extension remix breakbeat, but I think this is the Sandman CJ Macintosh version. Well, it doesn't really matter though, because just Versatile Extension, really. Let's have a listen. So this is from a hip hop tune. It sounds, pretty programmed to me. What I've done is I've monoized this version of the breakbeat. If I'm using the Versatile Extension original, I might do some stuff where I do a sort of like balanced mix of the left and right signals to get the right amount of shaker in. But here I've just monoized it. It sounds like they've made this break with one shots. So it makes it really nice and easy to use. It sounds clean, great. Look, I haven't even put any EQ on here. No need for compression. What have I got in the bus? I've literally just put some, look at this. Like minus less than a dB in the 4 kilohertz region. Really didn't have to do much on that. But I have layered the set speed up with some other stuff to make it sound a little bit more interesting. The first one I've got is, so that is Kid and Play, Do This My Way. And as you can hear, I've just got the shuffles and then a bit more of an obvious chicken tikka there. And that kind of like, that just gives this Versatile Extension a bit more flavour. I use this on so many tunes. I've got to spice it up a little bit, or all my tunes are just going to sound identical. What else? Okay, so then we've got this one. It's just a bit of a think breakbeat. I don't even know which version. I've got, you can see here, whereas these first two are just like making a two-step, we've got a little bit of extra interest here. And that's making things sound a tiny little bit more interesting. I wouldn't go crazy with the choppage in an Atmo tune generally. I'm just keeping it nice. Now, the fourth break. Oh, actually, let me see what process I put on those. Okay, monoizing. Tiny bit of drum studio reverb on the Do This My Way. Bringing out the kick and a bit of the kind of mids on the think, nothing, not even doing anything with this utility. Now this beat is off the Megabass remix sample CD from 1993. This break has been used on some Photech tune some Photech Chupa tune, I think it was, and also on Nookie. In a Space, I think the tune's called. It's kind of like a brittle hot pants based sort of break, I think, really. I've got some Shaperbox here. Clearly, this is just moving the volume down on the snares, because those snares were too loud. If I turn that off, I mean, that's not much of a difference, really, but in the context of the mix, it made a little bit of difference. And then some EQ literally just taking off the bottom end. I mean, if you've seen my Liquid DnB track breakdown, you'll have seen on there, I was really going to town on all the breaks and one shots and everything. With atmospheric drum and bass, I feel if you do that, it ends up, it doesn't end up having that kind of authentic sound that I wanted. I mean, I haven't even used, if you look on the music and bass here, I haven't used even any side chaining. I mean, I'd even put side chaining on an old school hardcore tune just to bring out the volume level. But I don't know, for old school atmospheric DnB, I like just keeping it kind of, just old school feeling, really, or whatever, really. What else we got in this drum bass? We got shaker. And so we've got you can see there's a little bit of shuffle there. This is an even numbered 16th, and it's coming a little after the beat, and it's a bit quieter, and that's creating that shuffle. So we're grooving, and then finally on the beats, what have we got here? Actually, okay, just taking off the low end on the shaker. Again, drum studio reverb. And then we've got a ride. Now this ride is coming just straight off the JV, the jazz drum set. Nice. Just using the right channel. Loads of the low end and mids taken out there. Drum studio reverb again. This utility doing nothing. It's just, eighth notes. Nothing too crazy. Let's listen to all of that stuff together. And that's just a clean sounding, solid, unfussy beat. And that is a foundation for our track. Later on in the arrangement, you'll notice I've got some color coded stuff going on here. I think this is because I made a fill. Let's listen. Nothing too crazy there. It's just a little bit of a chop up or whatever to keep things rolling, and that happens 4 times in the track, basically. Okay, so now it comes to music. So in the music section, let's go for the big main pad first of all. Let's have a look at this. So what have we got here? Okay, we're in F. Let me make sure I haven't transposed this note. We're definitely in F. This is coming off the Roland JD 800, the JD Magic preset. And what have we got going on here? We've got a low pass filter, which is really taking quite a lot off. And then I'm also taking off the bottom end. Let's hear what this actually sounds like. Oh, well, it does sound nice. Let's hear what it sounds like without all of that reduction. Ooh, sounds even nicer, doesn't it? But for whatever reason, I decided, in the context of the mix, it was better to take these things out. And you know, you really want your beats to be poking through because, hey, look, I know you might have grown up thinking drum bass comes from video games. It's club and rave music, really. So the beats and the bass have to be loud and banging, and that, you know, loud and banging beats and bass, that is the foundation of a DnB tune. So let's have a listen to there we go. Pads and beats. I could listen to it all day, but I mustn't because we need to look at some other elements. Okay, so we've got the foundation of our track here. In fact, let's look at this chord. So this is a C minor, and then we've got the, oh God, is that the 30th? Is that the 11th in there? Okay, look, let's work this out. Root note, minor third, 5th, 7th, the 9th would be there. It's not in this tune, and that is the 11th, I guess. So we've got the 11th without the 9th. That's kind of all right, I guess, and it sounds nice and jazzy. Oh, okay, there's the whole thing. We don't need to listen to that right now. Okay, so let's see what other elements we've got. We've got some kind of like lead string group here, I guess. Oh, God. Come on, Timmy. Keep it together. Oh, purity. Yeah, I'm a rompler connoisseur. Purity, you know, it's literally just called analog pad. It's got the low end taken out. This line is really very similar to System by KMC. Big up KMC, absolute legend. Then what? Oh, now look, we have Loop Cloud Play. Would you imagine I'd be using Loop Cloud Play? Well, I am. So this is just like a free rompler you get with Loop Cloud. And in fact, I talked like a few years ago when I was working for Loop Masters. I talked to the dude who made like the sounds for their rompler stuff. Because I was making some content for them or whatever. He was a really sound guy, and I think he was pretty influenced by old school drum bass, and I was really into a lot of those sounds. So I can't remember his name. Big up that guy. Anyway, he was all right. So what have we got here? This is kind of a haunting thing. It's got loads of like release on it, so I haven't even. In fact, let's go to advanced mode. Look at all this release. Yeah. So I haven't needed any delay or reverb. Oh, musical emotions coming through. Okay, now what's this? Okay. Now, hey, great work, Timmy. This is a pad from my atmospheric pad sample pack on Polyend. Hey, look, it's not just a load of nonsense. I've used it my very self. Though I put a bit of processing on it. So let's have a listen to it without the processing and see what it does. Well, I've clearly pitched this up and looped it. And it sounds a bit odd like that, but look, I've put a bandpass filter on it, which is automated. Oh, and I've quantized the filter cutoff as well. And this quantizes it in terms of time. So it's kind of like a sample and hold thing. So you get like a kind of stepped filter effect. That does sound very nice. Even though I do say so myself, it's got the low end cutout. It's got the delay on there. It's sounding mystical. It's taking you into deep space, and that's exactly what we want to do. Okay, what else? What have we got on here? Okay, UVI Workstation is in the mix now. Synth Anthology 4, what have we got here? A KM1, I don't even know what that is. A KW8, is that Kawaii? I don't know. Whatever, it's sounding dope. Oh, and look. Soundtoys Effects rack using analog chorus. I use this preset all the time. It's a great little chorus. Let's have a listen to this noise. Yeah, I mean, this is a really technospherical vibe. It's Feature Engineers. It's KMC. It's Flippin' Vangelis. Nice. I'm happy with that. Okay, now the main lead. Now this was kind of where... So I put this... I think I made this after the main pad and before everything else. This was really where I basically... The whole tune kind of like... I was like, okay, I do actually have an idea here. And it's Loop Cloud Play. Would you believe it? Breeze synth. What a sick little patch. Let me bypass these and let's have a listen. Yeah, this is really KMC inspired. It really does sound a lot like System. But hey, if you're going to rip something off, might as well rip off a classic, am I right? So we're like F minor here. And I feel like what really gives it that, and it's, we're playing a kind of arpeggio, like a broken arpeggio sort of thing. What I feel like really gives it that techno feel is hitting the minor second. And then it goes up to the... Is that the minor second? Major second? Whatever. It's the second, and then it goes up to the minor third. And it's that little bit of flavour that gives it the feeling. So let's listen. Techmosphere in action right there. Let's turn these effects back on. Let's hear what we got. So we've got ping pong. So this is 3/16 note ping pong, which is giving a lot of stereo. I mean, normally I'd put some utility on after something like that to take the stereo down. I haven't here. I was either feeling it or being lazy. And they've got some cathedral reverb, sounding real nice. I mean, like I say, at my tunes, I don't tend to like really over-engineer like liquid DnB tunes. It's sounding all right. Let's have a listen to that. I think that stereo panorama sounds nice. What have we got here? Okay, so this next sound is Capsule, which is another rompler. And I really like this sound. Let's have a listen. In fact, I'll turn the effects off. Let's see what we got here. So this is kind of like a tuned percussion sound. It sounds kind of like wet to me. It reminds me of that Quicksilver tune on rugged vinyl that is a little bit of a classic. Yeah, so hey, so look, this is the thing, right? You can rip off one tune. You sound like a rip-off artist. You rip off something else as well. Hey, you're onto a winner. Let's listen to that sounds with some other bits on. Again, super wide. You got your EQ, you got your reverb. I mean, I feel like you should be getting the idea at this point. Okay, Super 8. And look, it's the proper plugin version, not the reactor version. That's what we like to see. Good stuff. What's this one doing? Let's have a listen. Wow. This is real simple. It's just low pass, saws with a low pass filter envelope on it. But, I'm using a different synth here, so it's got a little bit of, flavour on it. EQ, delay, reverb, bish bash bosh. What's next? The sounds keep coming. Okay, now this is a little bit more interesting. So what have we got here? Now this is sounding nice and futuristic. And it's nothing too crazy. It's EQ, delay, reverb. But let's find out, what is this sound? In fact, look, I haven't even warped it. I don't know. What is this sound? Let's just have a listen. Reveal your secrets to... Okay. Synth one-shot echo flute chords E6 sus2. Let's have a listen. Well, they'd really done all the work in this sample, hadn't they? Okay. You guys can go away. You see, this sound has got a lot of flavour in it. And I dug out that flavour with my little rodent hands and made a nice noise, basically. So, and it doesn't sound, it's still got the soul of that original sound, but I've mucked about with it a bit. And, created a little bit of a rhythmical riffing. So, a tiny bit of creativity there. You're very welcome. Okay, Super 8. Again, what's it doing? Relic, this preset is called. Oh. It's like a little sparkling spacey noise. It's really not doing too much. What is it? Sines and saw and they're filtered. Really nothing to write home about, but I'm keeping things interesting, because if you listen to this track, you might not think, oh, there's a million ideas in there, But I do keep adding stuff in and out to hopefully keep it rolling, hopefully keep it interesting. Okay, Oriental is a preset from Zebra CM. Boom. Big up Yuhi, big up Urs, big up Computer Music Magazine, big up Zebras. What's this doing? In fact, let's turn all the effects off because we got loads. It's just a really simple synth sound with low pass filter on it. I mean, look, these waveforms are like a little bit fancy, but you know, it's nothing too crazy. And then what have we got here? This will be chorus, no doubt. Yep, analog chorus. This EQ will be taking out the low end. Oh, look, I'm boosting a little bit of mid-high. Okay, then we have Ozone Imager, which is great for stereoizing stuff. Wide, more width from the ping pong. Really just rinsing the width here. And then we've got this reverb, which is a bright vocal space. All jolly good. Okay, now what have we got here? This looks like a bass line to me. Yes, it is the bass line. It's Serum, guys. The preset Tim Mello 808 Atmo. I mean, it really does what it says on the tin here. What's this bass line doing? And that is if that's a rip-off of anything, it's a rip-off of the Aquasky bass line from their Visible from Earth remix. Also, that same bass line used in the Dave Wallace remix of Everything But the Girl, Walking Wounded. Two absolutely banging remixes from the Bournemouth boys, and I've appropriated their sounds for this tune. So how long is this bass line? It's 2 bars. 2 bars is a good bass line to keep things rolling. 2 bars is generally what I'd use for a liquid DnB bass line. For an Atmo tune, I might go to like 4. But here I've just got rolling 2 bars. I have varied it slightly the second time round. Okay. A little concession to being interesting there, but nothing too wild. And you know, like I said before, no side chaining. Okay, so in the FX group, no side chaining. Oh, and then we've got a sample. Now, if you watch my videos, you'll know I'm pretty gung-ho about sampling. And my philosophy is generally, if you're small time like me, no one cares what you do. That said, I'm trying not to dox myself, so I have removed the name of this sample because it's from some media. And you know, what with AI getting more and more terrifying, who knows when a Terminator's going to watch one of my videos and be like, oh no, you can't sample that, I'm going to come and murder you. So I'm not going to tell you what this is. But hey, if you recognise it, why not dox me in the flipping comments if you're clever? In fact, I'll leave the effects on it. Try and confuse the AI as much as possible. What is this doing? And you'll notice this sample has a little bit of kind of incidental music in there. Normally, that's the sort of thing I'd try and crop out. But I believe I've pitched it around. Yes, I have. I've taken it down 2 semitones. In the context of the tune, it's sounding all right. I mean, if it was sounding all discordant and horrible, I might have messed with it, but it's just a little bit of extra flavour for free. Okay, what's next? And that gave the track its name, Piece of Future. Track's called Future Fragments. Pretty clever. Okay, next track. Now, I believe that is a Star Trek sample from a 0G CD. I think that's like some kind of is it what are the lasers they shoot on Star Trek spaceships? Phasers? That's the one. These are the ones they shoot from their hands. I guess. Look, it's probably a phaser or some kind of Star Trek missile. Anyway, I'm sure was that sampled on LCJ Bookham calling out? Anyway, look, I'm not the first person to sample out. I'm pretty sure I won't be the last. But anyway, nice sound. Tons of those old Star Trek sounds are on old sample CDs. The sound design on them is absolutely wicked. 138 track. It's got big Star Trek sample on it. Classic sounds. What else we got? This just like the most generic sci-fi sound you could imagine. Really, I'm not even going to bother talking about it much more. What's this? It's just the most generic white noise sweep you could ever hope to hear. Really pushing the boundaries here. This sound's been used on a ton of old DnB tunes. I think that's off an Ecstatic Goldmine, or it's probably another Zero G. Who knows? And then Crash. What's this? I think it's going to be a Crash. It's a Crash. It's pretty tasteful. Okay, that is all the noises. So, and we've covered what's on the master. So let's just look at the arrangement for a bit, and I'll just go through this real quick. Now, since I started, in fact, I found when I started DJing a bit, I mean, I wasn't really like DJing raves or whatever. I was just DJing like bars or whatever. Mainly, I've DJed a few clubs or whatever, and a few, a couple of low key raves or whatever. Good fun. But my point is, learning to DJ really kind of helped me have a perspective on track structure. And since I started to DJ, I'd really like to do DJ friendly tunes, because like I want to play my own tunes. I won't want them to be hard to play. And so I never used to be particularly fond of tunes that started with beats. Now that's practically all I make. And this one starts with beats and a bit of pad. So 60 bars later, what happens? Then we get like our lead pad Atmo things coming in. Bar 33. The main riff comes in, and we're building towards the drop, which happens here, I guess. Oh no, we have a breakdown. And we've got like kind of like counter melody stuff going on here. It's all getting a bit interesting. But what we really want to happen is that beat, and that's going to happen on bar 65. Vocal goes into it. Okay, so what happens here is we get rid of this kind of like sort of counter melody, and then we have this different counter melody instead. So it doesn't just sound like when the drop happens, just the beats coming in. I mean, that can work. For this track, I probably thought it didn't or whatever. Let's just have a listen. Actually, let's and this sound's gone out. This sound's come in. So this rhythmic pad thing's coming in, and that's giving us more movement over the drop. So, so even though a lot of the sounds in this mix are placid, we are getting, a bit of movement without going over the top. Then look, this comes back in. We get this other little noise in here. Then we're switching things back round. Just elements coming in and out. And then we have a breakdown. It's kind of minimal or whatever. Give the MC a chance to chat some breeze over the top of it, Give people a chance to experience the cold, fresh air. And then another drop. But what's it all about? Well, it's minimal. This is just drum and bass territory, and I've toned down the bass line. So we're going into like, 3 notes. It's pretty simple, really. But it provides a bit of difference, If you're rinsing the sounds for the whole thing, it's probably going to sound a bit boring. But by having a bit of dynamics in terms of the arrangement, it makes it hopefully a more compelling listen. Then the pads come back in. This little sound gets its time to shine. And we're gradually heading back to the main thing. But look, the main riff isn't even in here. And that's just the icing on the cake, and that comes back in. And we revert to the original bass line. Then we bring in the more rhythmic pads. So it's a balancing act of keeping the vibes interesting, but also keeping a consistent feel, keeping things rolling. You get the idea. Just sounds coming in and out. And then we have a beats bassline pad outro, and then just the beats and the bassline, and then just the beats, very handy to mix out of. Also, if you're a Philistine DJ, I've given you a bit of an out here where you can, you know, you've really got like 32 bars to mix in another track there if you're a coward, or you can play the whole of my awesome tune like a Chad and then mix out in this bit. You know, play 7 minutes 40 of my tune in your mix. Why not? Okay, so that's basically it. Future Fragments by Chronicle. Order it now, please. Why don't you? And yeah, big ups to ASC. Okay, that's more than enough sustained minor chords for one video. If you like what you've seen, please like and subscribe. Also, please check out the Chronicle Time and Space EP on Curvature. Pre-order link in the description. Also, Chronicle Outer Rings forthcoming on Ocbron 61, I believe. Also, please check out my Atmospheric Pads sample pack. And hey, enjoy atmospheric drum and bass. It's wicked. Later. Hey, what's up? Tim Cant here, and in this video we're going to be looking at the dark side of hardcore and jungle. We're not going to be getting too technical, we're mainly going to be listening to some tunes to hear the development of the sound, and yes, there is an accompanying playlist of all the tunes I mentioned in the video in the description, where you can also find links to my various goods and services. So, without further ado, let's get cooking. Hardcore has always had a dark side, and this darkness can be heard in its precursor genres such as Belgian techno and new beat, and UK hardcore hip hop. New beat took influence from new wave, industrial and 80s dance sounds, combining them into a darker, edgier form of synth pop. Harder edge Belgian electronic groups such as Front 242 were a big influence on the prodigy, and you can hear a few new beat samples in early hardcore tunes, such as Nexus and Blowback sampling Acid Rock by Rhythm Device for Mofo's theme, and Alternate sampling Jar Jar LaBoom's Something Scary for their track Frequency. Inspired by the emerging sound of Detroit techno, new beat spawned Belgian techno in the late 80s, which took the sound in a more dance-influenced, less synth-pop-focused direction. Despite the US influence, Belgian techno had an edgy, ravey feel that separated it stylistically from the US techno of the time. By the early 90s, Belgian techno gave us tracks such as Brazil's Spectrum, Frank de Wolf's Moribund, and Modular Expansion, also Frank de Wolf's Cubes. You can hear these three tracks sampled on dozens, if not hundreds of hardcore tunes, including material by The House Crew, NRG, Cubase, DJ Seduction, Blame, The Prodigy, The Hypnotist, and plenty more. That's just the tip of the iceberg, and there are huge numbers of Belgian techno tracks played by UK DJs and sampled by UK artists, so it's hard to overstate the influence Belgian techno had on UK hardcore. While Belgian techno gave UK hardcore its sinister synth edge, it's UK hip-hop where you can hear the roots of the dark breakbeat sound. Many of the UK Britcore tracks from the late 80s that are regarded as classics are dark and moody, to put it mildly. Let's take, for example, Silver Bullet's 20 Seconds to Comply from 1989. Up-tempo breakbeats, movie samples, sinister chanting, a lot of the dark side tropes are here, and the new sampling hardware of the late 80s is clearly being used to full effect. Other tracks from around this time like First Frontal Assault, hits from Small Arms Fire and Depth Charge's Depth Charge also took a more is more approach to movie sampling.
Hits from Small Arms Fire. Hits from Small Arms Fire. Hits from Small Arms Fire.
I will die after you. I'll see to that.
Oh, crazy.
Along with the cinematic atmospherics, British hip-hop could be subversive. For example, Hijack put out a track called Hijack the Terrorist Group on their The Horns of Jericho album in 1991, and Talking Loud signed the Marxist hip-hop group Marksman in the early 90s too. Tracks like Rebel MC's Richer Getting Richer and the House Crew's All We Want to Do Is Dance directly called out economic inequality and tabloid propaganda.
Many poor, but they can't get more. Divide and rule was a tactic. In the West End, you spend but don't lend. Ready to receive but never give to a friend.
Unacceptable, say the media. While the tabloid press is getting seedier. The chancellor, he's getting greedier. The lower class has never been needier.
Britpop had a rebellious, positive message, and the utopic heyday of rave was just around the corner. Post-1988's acid house Summer of Love, various musical styles including hip-hop, techno and house began to coalesce into what would become known as hardcore. It's possible to hear some serious darkness in the nascent breakbeat hardcore sound of the late 80s and early 90s in tracks such as The Black Dogs' Virtual from 1989, and Four Heroes' Mr. Kirk's Nightmare and The Scientist's Exorcist from 1990. By 1991, hardcore rave was increasing rapidly in popularity and crossing over into the mainstream, and by this point Belgian techno and UK hip-hop were becoming subsumed by the emerging breakbeat hardcore sound. You can hear the influence of both Belgian techno and hardcore hip-hop in tracks such as Zero B's Module from 1991, which features dark atmospheric synth sounds accompanied by heavy breakbeats and incessant techno kick drums. Let's check out some other nuggets from 91. How about the Prodigy's pre-Charlie, What Evil Lurks?
Hold the beat, stop the beat, drop the beat.
And here's another release on Four Heroes Reinforced Records, Nebula 2's Athiyama. Soundcore's Dreamfinder is another pioneering early darkside track. The original release of Egyptian Empire's Horn track came out in 1991, and it's an ahead-of-its-time jungleistic breakbeat fest. Asen's Close Your Eyes, Optic Confusion combined dark ravey atmospheres with Jim Morrison and Beatles samples to create a moment of dark magnificence.
Here comes the sun, I say it's alright.
Time Bass and Chromosomes Unity is an early, almost reverse bass style track that was memorably sampled at the end of the decade by DJ Luck and MC Neat for their garage anthem With a Little Bit of Luck.
Unity is going to be the key to our success.
An early track by hard trance legend Chucky, Mark I, Hoovers and Spray Cans is another sinister slice of hardcore, which has a more uplifting pad section that provides respite from the bleakness. Lenny Dice's We Are IE is arguably the standard bearer of early dark jungle sounds from this era, with its energetic breaks and Pet Shop Boys pad sample.
Let me hear you scream. Let me hear you scream.
GWE's Fire When Ready is another early dark anthem which features pioneering use of time-stretched vocals. Finally, Messiah's 20,000 Hardcore Members is a synth-heavy techno banger with some entertaining movie samples from The Warriors and Life of Brian. So, darkside was always a big part of the hardcore rave sound, though you might not have appreciated that unless you were involved in the scene at the time. To the casual observer, it might have appeared that the rave scene was dominated by so-called Toy Town techno and house sampling piano anthems. Indeed, by 1992 Rave had become a cultural phenomenon in the UK, with feel-good anthems like SL2's On a Raggatip, Smarties' Sesame Street and Liquid's Sweet Harmony doing the business both in the charts and at raves. The hardcore vibe was broadly utopian, and the implied message of hardcore was, let's all be nice to each other and dance messily in a field. However, by the end of 1992, the happy rave vibe began to fall out of favour with hardcore tastemakers. Perhaps they had had enough of the accessible rave sound, or were enthralled by the innovative sounds of artists such as Jack Smooth, Edge of Darkness and Roughage Crew. Roughage Crew's Terminator is widely considered to be the decisive moment where the hardcore zeitgeist became irrevocably drawn to the dark side. But first let's consider Roughage Crew's previous Dark Rider EP. Yes, the Dark Rider EP is indeed dark, but it's got some full-on rave moments in there. Take for example Believe, which kicks off with a chipmunk vocal and a piano intro sampled from Mimo Mix featuring Valerie Etienne's Italo house banger All Your Love. However, rather than going into a hands in the air uplifting rave anthem, it drops straight into an expectation subverting, sinister drum and bass affair. Believe isn't the only darkside track to sample All Your Love either. Here's Strings of Darkness from Darkman's As Dark As It Gets EP. A DJ SS&EQ co-production, you might be forgiven for thinking you've been bait and switched when the Mimo Mix pianos drop, and you're given a decent chunk of uplifting rave action before the eponymous Strings of Darkness kick in. What's common to both these tracks is that they abruptly switch up from uplifting piano rave into the dark side. Dare I suggest they're a little bit like microcosms of what happened to the rave scene as a whole. Released under the Metalheads alias in late 92, Terminator was a step on from the Dark Rider EP, with futuristic atmospherics and abstract process sounds that, while retaining rave's energy, pared back the ravey stabs and focused on breakbeat processing, unsettling sounds and ominous movie samples. It was a massive tune, and it had an influence on the scene that resonates to this day.
Terminator is out there.
Post the arrival of Terminator, Judgment Day if you will, Rave's dark future seemed like fait accompli. Let's take for example the Suburban Bass discography. In summer and late 92, they were putting out tons of radio-friendly uplifting rave bangers like Rachel Wallace's Tell Me Why and Sons of a Loop-de-Loop era's Peace and Loveism. However, by the time Sub-Bass 20 rolls around in early 93, we see a profound change in direction with DJ Hype's upsetting Shot in the Dark.
Ain't it wild? What's criminal? Ain't it wild?
Process breaks, hip-hop and soundclash samples, scratch techno noises. This was a far cry from the Suburban Bass output of just a few months earlier. Similar things happened with other labels too. Moving Shadow went from the piano antics of Blame's Feel the Energy and Cosmo and Dib's Exaltation to Too Bad Mice's Underworld EP, which features remixes from, funnily enough, Roughage Crew and DJ Hype. Here's a little bit of DJ Hype's remix of Underworld.
You're walking someplace and it's
Yes, it's very dark. Again, Moving Shadow went from pianos to hellish vibes without missing a beat. How about Production House? Yes, again we go from pianos with Asen's practically symphonic Trip to the Moon Part 3 and Baby D's anthemic Let Me Be Your Fancy, segueing into DMS's grimy SOS and DJ solos appropriately named Darkage. The hardcore scene seemed keen to take itself yet further underground and distance itself from the now ubiquitous happy rave sound. By mid-1993, the uplifting energy of hardcore rave had broadly been replaced by the new zeitgeist of darkside. While Britpop had an angry but ultimately positive message and hardcore leaned utopian, darkside's vibe was pure nihilism. Here is an example, is a little of Boogie Time Tribe's Ultramagnetic MCs sampling Real Hardcore Part 1.
You see the dark shadow, you will live in hell.
The vibes are dark, sure, but I would posit that what really defines Darkside isn't its dark aesthetic, but rather a desire to push the music forward. The Darkside was a place where experimentation could flourish. Two of the most influential early Darkside tracks, Terminator and 4 Heroes' Journey from the Light, explored early time stretching and pitch shifting technology to process breaks in exciting new ways. Journey from the Light used Akai time stretching capabilities on an Ike Turner funky mule breakbeat to create versions of the sample at ascending pitches, creating rich new textures that would be enormously influential to the Darkside sound. Terminator used the funky drummer-based Wishing on a Star break by Fresh 4 run through the real-time pitch shifting capability of an Eventide H3000 Ultra Harmonizer to create a unique gliding pitch effect.
You're talking about things that I haven't done yet.
Another great example of breakbeat processing is De Cruz's Want You Now DJ SS and EQ remix, which features what, to me, sounds like a chopped and sequence break that's pitch bent up and down without time stretching. As mentioned previously, DJ Hype used scratched techno synths to great effect in Shot in the Dark, and this technique can also be heard on his track The Chopper using Belgian techno track Stylus Flight by Equitech. The dark side is where we start to hear some of jungle staple stylistic tropes. For example, you can hear volume modulated bass sounds in DJ Hype's Shot in the Dark and The Trooper. Pitched breakbeat edits began to appear around this time, as heard in JMJ and Rich's Hall of Mirrors and DJ Mayhem's In S. Time stretch vocals are another example. For example, you can hear a pitched up vocal with the characteristic Akai time stretch sound in 4 Heroes' Students of the Future Roughage Crew remix. Hardcore thrived on fast-paced, often multi-layered breaks, but the dark side began to see an increase in popularity of breaks that was still high-tempo but had a slower, funkier feel. Examples of this include Subnation's Scotty, Doc Scott's Here Come the Drums remix, and Body Snatch's Euphony, aka Just For You London.
Scotty! Scotty! Scotty!
Another way in which hardcore producers of this era pushed the sound forward was to use a broader array of sound sources. We already heard Ace and Take on the Beatles, now here's Baby Kane sampling Simon and Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence for Hello Darkness.
Hello, darkness. Hello, darkness. Hello, darkness.
4 Heroes sampled Don McLean's American Pie for their mysterious psychedelic The Elements, which comes on like a bad acid trip. The most important change in the sound of 1993 was the increased focus on having less cluttered mixes that put breaks at the front and centre. One of the best examples of this is Origin Unknown's Valley of the Shadows, aka Long Dark Tunnel, aka 31 Seconds.
31 seconds. 31 seconds.
Famously, Long Dark Tunnel used a lot of sounds from the first ever cover-mounted Future Music CD, which featured a bunch of demo tracks from sub-CD publishers AMG and Time and Space. Let's see where some of these sounds come from. Rather than rave stabs, Valley of the Shadows' musical centerpiece is an ascending Korg monopoly arpeggio riff from AMG's Old Gold Synth sub-CD. The mix puts the think-based heavy D you ain't heard nothing yet break, via the ecstatic Goldmine 1 sample CD, to the forefront, and also used a downwards pitch shifting effect on its break to create a lo-fi shuffling effect too. The 31 seconds vocal sample is also taken from this CD via ecstatic Goldmine and NASA.
T-minus 31 seconds, and we're gone for auto sequence start. T-minus 25 seconds. The sequencer on the orbiter now controlling the final seconds of the countdown. The body flap and speed brake are in launch position. T-minus 10 seconds.
These sounds are accompanied by a simple, sustained bass line, and the mix is defined and propulsive. Valley of the Shadows was a milestone release, and it was monumentally influential in hardcore's development into jungle and drum and bass. At this point, I'd like to demonstrate the sea change that was occurring around this time, with some examples of remixes that I feel delineate dark hardcore with the new school of jungle DnB. First we have Boogie Time Stripe, aka Keybase and DeCruise's Dark Stranger. The original version of this track feels very much like a hardcore tune with a mischievous, almost over-the-top feel and playful pitch-bending breaks. In the wake of the success of Valley of the Shadows, Dark Stranger was remixed by Origin Unknown, and this version is much more streamlined, with the relatively sparse arrangement giving the elements more room to breathe and sound loud in the mix. I've heard this version played out in contemporary DnB DJ sets, which is testament to the quality of its construction. Origin Unknown also remixed their own remix, creating Dark Stranger, the Origin Unknown remix, which is less well known than the original remix, but is still worth a listen. Another remix that I feel demonstrates hardcore's transformation into jungle DnB is the case of Hypron Experience's Lords of the Null Lines. I feel the original version of this track is very interesting. Its break is a light, snappy affair from Norman Cook's Skip to My Loop Psalm CD, and it's reminiscent of the work Hypron Experience member Alex Banks would do later as part of the jazzy Easy Rollers. In contrast, musically the track features a real grab bag of elements, including a variety of hyperactive bass sounds, horror soundtrack-esque synth lines, and an energetic techno-inspired Roland Alpha Geno riff. Like many 93 Moving Shadow releases, it was remixed by Foul Play to great success, and the Foul Play remix, like the Origin Unknown version of Dark Stranger, is streamlined, upfront sounding, and a real indicator of where the scene was heading. Funnily enough, Foul Play also remixed the track twice, the second time with DJ Randall, and this version is my favourite with its catchy, descending, warping bass line. Something Dark Stranger and Lords of the Null Lines had in common was sampling from movies, or at least an interview promoting a movie in the case of Dark Stranger.
I was fascinated by the myth of Dracula when I was a kid, the dark side of all human nature itself.
He comes to you in the night, the Dark Stranger.
Lords of the Null Lines heavily samples the, in my opinion, unfairly maligned Predator 2. And it was by no means the only darkside track to do so. Another form of technological innovation that fueled the darkside sound was the humble VHS player. Before videotape technology became ubiquitous in UK households in the 80s and early 90s, owning copies of movies wasn't something practical for most people. However, by the early 90s, you could buy or rent a huge variety of films in dedicated stores or high street shops. Combined with the relative affordability of sampling hardware, this gave producers the opportunity to snatch dialogue, music and sound effects from their fave films. In darkside hardcore, this kind of unauthorised sampling was nothing less than rampant. Two of the most sampled movies in dark hardcore were Predator 2 and the Steven Seagal vehicle Marked for Death, both films featuring Jamaican gangsters, which was a thematic fit for the burgeoning jungle vibe. Marked for Death in particular was notable for kicking off the Johnny, Scotty, Ricky trend, started by Johnny Jungle's Johnny.
Johnny, help me! Johnny, help me!
This was followed up by Subnation's Scotty, which samples Sam Raimi's original The Evil Dead.
Cheryl was right. We're all gonna die here.
Then in 1994, Remark put out the Boys from the Hood sampling Ricky.
Ricky! LB! Help me, somebody out! Ricky! LB!
This trend was parodied on a bonus track on Remix Record 6, though sadly this skit isn't available digitally at the time of making this video, and as I currently don't have access to a physical copy, I'm unable to provide a clip, but trust me, it was pretty funny. The 80s and early 90s was a golden age of action, horror and science fiction film, and I remember reading an interview with legendary producer Pete Parsons, aka Voyager, about how back in the day he often had Aliens or Predator on in the background in the studio. And sampling aside, I think the quality cinema of this era was really influential on the producers of the time. You can hear darkside tune samples in an absolute ton of films from this era, including Aliens, Predator 1.
He's in the jungle. He just came alive and took him.
Predator 2. RoboCop. Shut your mouth. All 3 Evil Dead films.
We're not gonna die. We're not gonna die. We're gonna get out of here.
Sam Raimi's other banger, Darkman. The Shining. Candyman.
Yes? Who is that?
Roadhouse.
Nobody died.
And Rambo 2. Away from Hollywood, regulated movies like The Harder They Come, Babylon and Rockers were sampled in tunes which played a big part in developing the Ragga Jungle sound.
I say, man, song get mash up last night.
It mash up.
I know that all of you shall weakness in the head, as bad man shall fall.
Even family-friendly movies got in on the act, with Remark sampling Home Alone and DJ SS sampling both Disney's The Jungle Book and Warner Brothers' Looney Tunes.
Hey, don't get scared now.
I'm the king of the swingers, oh, the jungle VIP. I've reached the top and had to stop, and that's what's bothering me.
Everything is getting dark. Everything is getting dark.
How about some Mary Poppins courtesy of MB? And what about this Cubase sample of the new Scooby-Doo movies theme, presumably via Lord Finesse's You Know What I'm About? While we're on the subject of animation, how about Rebel MC's X Project sampling Aled Jones's Walking in the Air? I'm on a roll, so how about one more? We saw Joe's Darkman sampling R-Type earlier, but did you know that it also sampled a Sega Master System version of Darius 2, aka Sagaya? So, while Darkside might have lost Rave's utopian vibes, it certainly didn't lose its sense of experimentation or playfulness. By the end of 1993, hardcore's evolution into what we think of today as jungle was nearly complete. Records like LTJ Bookham's Music and Omni Trio's Renegade Snares helped elevate hardcore to new levels of musical maturity, and intelligent anthems like Deep Blue's The Helicopter Tune and Engineers Without Fear's Spiritual Aura were bringing a more soulful feeling to the emerging jungle sound. I would argue that Renegade, aka Ray Keith's Terrorist, marks the beginning of the final evolution of Darkside into jungle. Here's a little bit of jungle trivia for you. I interviewed Rave for Future Music back in 2016, and he mentioned to me that the piano intro of Terrorist was directly inspired by the similar piano intro to the original version of Lords of the Null Lines. Incidentally, this Terrorist piano is a replayed version of New Wave's Japan's Night Porter. However, the rest of the tune is far removed from the earlier ravey dark sound, with its pioneering use of the Reese bass, iconic Jar Shaka dub atmospherics, and stripped back mix that focuses on breakbeat chops above all else. It's dark for sure, but we're out of pitch down synth choir and horror movie sample territory here. It was around this time too that dancehall samples really became dominant as the flavour in the scene. You can hear the combination of dark and dancehall flavours in tracks like Louis Cypher's Heat from 1993, but by early 1994, more dancehall-centric tracks like Conquering Lion, aka Rebel MC's Code Red, and Leviticus, aka Jumping Jack Frost's Burial, were the new hotness.
I eating all the bliss, watch out! For the girls are sweet and unique. For the girl them with the sexy physique.
You can hear the dark side still present in jungle anthems like Dred Bass's Dead Dred and Remark R.I.P. DJ Hype remix, but the jump up jungle style had become the dominant force by this point. Another important stylistic development is the arrival of happy hardcore as a separate genre. In 1993, pioneering happy hardcore labels like Impact, Homegrown, Night Force and Asylum were putting out as much dark material as happy stuff. For example, tracks like DJ Seduction's Really Dark, System AD Daringa Street, Lunacy Edge of Madness, and Vibes of Wish Doctor's Obsession. In my opinion, some of the most exciting dark records of early 1994 were from happy hardcore producers, tracks like DJ Demo's Corrosive Volume 1, Mystic and Fire's True Love remix, and Ramos Supreme and Sunset Regime Marley's Rush Happy Mix. However, past Dreamscape 11 or so, the happy side begins to clarify and become single-mindedly focused on uplifting sounds. Likewise in jungle drum and bass, by mid-1994, the dark side seemed for the most part consigned to history, with even labels like Ram and Metalheadz exploring different sonic territory. However, by 1996, darkness was back in the form of tech step, a DnB genre that, to put it reductively, was more of an Event Horizon vibe than Darkside's Evil Dead feel. Genre mavens Ed Rush and Optical were Darkside veterans, having released tracks like Blood Clot, Art Attack and Clint a few years earlier, and even they couldn't resist sampling Predator 2 for their seminal Cut Slow, a Locust mix. Since Techstep, the Darkside has never really left DnB, and Darkside has also been influential outside of drum and bass. It's not hard to see the link between it and the hauntological sounds of Burial, for instance the tortured mentasms of South London boroughs. Like a lot of forms of dance music, the lockdown era saw a Darkside revival with labels like Good To Go and 8205 reanimating the sound and putting out new and unreleased material from back in the day. So, the future of Darkside is looking pretty bright. If you're a newcomer to the sounds of hardcore and jungle and want to learn more about this type of music, the natural place is to start with mixes. Rave mixtapes are great time capsules of where the scene was at a particular time, not least because we have a record of exactly when each mix was recorded. For example, check out Groove Rider at Amnesia House, Book of Love, 27th June 1992, to hear what is apparently the first time Terminator got dropped. If you prefer to listen to full tracks, then the era's compilation albums are a great way to introduce yourself to the sound. Darkside was well served by compilations, many of which I discuss in my video ranking the best 90s jungle compilation album art. The Jungle Techno, Hard Leaders and the Darkside series are all great for getting a feel of the dark sound. I recommend checking out Jungle Techno 2, Happiness and Darkness, as this gives you a feel for the split that was occurring in the happy and dark sounds of the time. Both Terminator and Valley of the Shadows appear on this release, which also features some more obscure tunes like Higher Octaves, Full Logic Control. Hard Leaders 3, Enter the Darkside, is a great collection of interesting Darkside tracks, with some tasty jungle techno in there, and a couple of more light-hearted tracks including Baby Kane's excellent Bagpipes in Effect.
Bagpipes in effect, let's go!
The Darkside, hardcore drum and bass style, is packed with innovative dark tunes like Doc Scott's Here Come the Drums, Edge of Darkness, Come Together, and Babylon Time Warp, aka Intense's Durban Poison. Illegal Pirate Radio 3 is another compilation that's split into happy and dark tracks and includes the seminal Key Project Champion Sound Alliance mix, Top Buzz's Living in Darkness, and Mad Dog's My God, a tune from early 1994 that showcases the pinnacle of slick, jungleistic Darkside production. Moving Shadow and Suburban Bass's The Joint LP is a gem, and as well as certified Darkside stormers like Real Hardcore, Laws of the Null Lines, and an exclusive Johnny Jungle remix of Hype's The Chopper, you also get some more euphoric and raved up vibes in the form of Omni Trio's Mystic Stepper and Chrome and Time's The Slammer. For the real heads, of course, you need to check out some of the classic Darkside labels on Discogs. Some labels with great 1993 output include Reinforced, Suburban Bass, Moving Shadow, Formation Records, Basement, Face Records, Scanner, Certificate 18, Dark Horse, Rugged Vinyl, FBD Project, Absolute 2, Soap Bar, Boogie Beats, and of course loads more. In the playlist I've included every track mentioned in the video, plus lots of my own faves at the end, so check it out if you'd like to hear more. Well, that was a lot of sinister fun. If you've enjoyed yourself, why not check out the links in the description to my various professional services and goodies that I offer. And yeah, why not like and subscribe? And until next time, I'll see you later.